When I was 12 years old, my 15-year-old brother and I experienced a very horrific event while at our grandparents' cabin. My grandparents own a cabin on a rather large island in southern Sweden, which contains only 2 cabins, separated by slightly less than a mile. One summer, my brother and I, along with my mother and sister, went to visit them for a weekend. The thing we did most during our days there was go fishing. On the first day of our stay, we were planning to fish. We set everything up. All we had to do now was go dig for worms, which we used for bait. Grabbing a shovel along with a bucket, we went back up to the cabin and down a short slope and through a trail where we usually find plenty of worms. The forest is very dense and barely any light shines through, which makes the whole setting a bit unnerving for me, as I have always been easily frightened. I hear something walking and I look at my brother with a very scared face. He brushes it off as if there was nothing to be afraid of, and insists that we go check it out. We walk a bit further down the trail, which I know leads to an open meadow, as I have been there looking for mushrooms with my mom at a previous occasion. Before we get to the open, my brother holds up his hands as to indicate for me to stop. I looked over his shoulder and see behind the trees what appears to be a moose looking directly at us. I got relieved as I knew they were friendly, and as I had seen plenty of moose nearby. My brother, however, who has never been scared of anything, looks back at me with the biggest eyes I've ever seen, and the most pale I've ever seen someone, as he tells me we should get out of here. Without questioning him, I start to walk back while he keeps pushing me as to make me move quicker, and as we reach the cabin, we are pretty much running. My mom and grandma were sitting at the porch as we got into the front, and I tell them that we saw a moose. My brother, on the other hand, remains completely silent. Safe to say that there was no fishing that day. The following day, we didn't even bring up fishing. I'm sitting on the porch reading a magazine, and my brother is sitting inside on the couch doing the same, although he still has the scared look in his eyes. I spend the following hour or two reading several magazines until my grandpa asks me where the shovel is. I realize that we left it where we were looking for worms the previous day, and I tell him where it is. Just as he was about to go and get it, my mother tells me that my brother and I have to go get it, since we left it there. She also tells me that we should go dig up some worms, as she wants to go fishing later with us. I don't question it, but my brother seems unnerved by it. This made everything all the more unsettling for me, as my brother is not easily scared at all, pretty much the opposite of me. We put on our shoes and head to the back of the cabin and walk down the trail heading to where the shovel and bucket is. Once we are about 10 feet from where the shovel is, my brother stops and tells me I should go and dig, as he did it the last time. I do as he says and I start digging for worms. I have this very strong feeling that he stayed back because he was scared something would happen. I start hearing the bushes around me sway, and I hear sneaky footsteps moving closer and closer. Everything is all the more creepy as I have no idea where the footsteps are coming from. 1 second I'm sure they're coming from my right, the next it feels like they're coming from a completely opposite direction. I quickly put a few worms that I found in the bucket, and as I fumble to pick up the shovel, I feel as I'm being watched. My brother walks up to me and helps me seal the bucket, and I tell him it feels like someone is watching, to which he responds that we should leave. Just as we turn around and are ready to head back, I hear a crack from behind me and turn around. I look down the trail and see the moose once again, peeking at me from behind a tree. It looked very different from what they usually look like, as it felt much slimmer and sort of twisted. At the time, I'm more confused and curious than I am scared, and my brother is dead silent. I can't quite see the whole body of it, but I know that something is wrong. I stand for a couple more seconds watching it, as it is staring right at us. From what I can see, I realize that it's not standing on its 4 legs. It is leaned forward, as an old man with really bad posture, with its arms hanging straight down. I also had a weird sensation that the creature was trying to talk to me, saying, "Let me help you." In a few seconds, I get struck with panic and start walking really fast back to the cabin, my brother doing the same. It only takes a second before we are both in a full sprint running back to the cabin. I turn around and the moose-like creature is nowhere to be seen. We put the shovel by the shed where we took it, and bring the bucket of worms to the front where my mom and grandparents are. The day goes on as if nothing had happened, and we don't speak of it at all. Since this happened, I never thought I'd bring it up with my brother. We both just sort of knew that it would feel wrong to speak about it, and none of us had visited my grandparents' cabin since. To this day, I'm not sure at all what I saw. I mentioned it to my friend once, and he told me if what I said was true, then it was probably a Wendigo or a Skinwalker. He showed me some pictures from Google, and I instantly found resemblances of the creature that I saw back then. Until recently, I had completely repressed this event. But after reading several stories about Wendigo and Skinwalkers, my mind has once again become haunted by this event. And in a terrible way, I realized that what I most likely saw was something far more horrific than a moose. Out of all the things I've read about Wendigo, the most terrifying thing is that people say never to talk to it. I'm just imagining in my head what could have happened if I tried talking back to the creature when I felt it was speaking to me. Part 2. Alright, so some people asked me to share more regarding the events that happened when I was visiting my grandparents' cabin. I have not been there since, but my grandmother and her new husband stay there every summer. Note that this is about 6 years ago since the moose incident. Through the magic of Facebook, I contacted my grandma. We don't know each other all too well anymore, so I don't really feel comfortable calling her. I told her about the moose-like creature and how my brother and I both saw it. She proceeded by typing for nearly 15 minutes, and I waited patiently. Her reply was a full story of her own encounter with what she said she had hoped to be just a dysfunctional moose. Her writing was in Swedish, so I will do my best to translate it. About 20 years ago, I was staying in the cabin by myself. Your grandpa was working at the time, so I was alone for the whole week. One night, while I was sleeping, I woke up with an uneasy feeling. I wasn't sure why, but I just knew something was wrong. I felt as if I was being watched. My first thought was to fall back asleep, and so I did. I woke up in what I believe was about an hour, and this time I was sure something wasn't as it should be. I felt the same feeling of being watched, and I could clearly hear something moving outside. I grab my bedside candle and light it. As I get out of bed, I choose to not pull the curtains as I have a terrifying feeling that someone will be staring right at me. By now, I am convinced that something is trying to rob me. I was sleeping in the room at the back of the cabin, and so I walked up to the front and looked out by the porch, but see nothing. There are no neighbors nearby, and I can't call the police as I don't have a phone. I decide to go back to bed and try to sleep the fear away. I lay there for at least an hour without falling asleep. And although the sound is gone, the unpleasant feeling has stuck around. At the backside of the cabin, right outside my window, was an older cabin, which was used before this one was built. The place was creepy, and we eventually decided to burn it down some years later. Anyways, I hear something bumping around side of it, and I realize that I'm gonna have to look out the window. I get out of bed, light the candle again, and pull the curtains. The uneasy feeling is still there, and I have the strongest feeling that something is going to stare right back at me. I pull the curtains, and for a complete second I am caught in complete terror. I see something staring right back at me, but it's no robber. It's not a person. It's a moose. I expected to be relieved to find that it was nothing but a harmless animal, but that is far from what I was. After a few seconds I calmed down, and the panic faded a bit. The thing was still staring at me, but it was sure not a normal moose. I took a few seconds to investigate it. For first, it was not standing on 4 legs. It was bent forward, as if in the upper front legs were just barely floating above the ground. It was also much slimmer than moose usually are, and it had this sort of disturbing twist in the body. The antlers looked flat out terrifying. Naturally, it doesn't say anything, but I had this strong feeling that it wanted me to come out. It wanted me to let it help me. Although I felt that's what it wanted me to hear, I just knew the thing had bad intentions. I faint within a few seconds, and I wake up in the morning and let out a scream of panic. The creature is gone, and I am contemplating whether or not I was dreaming. To this day, I was unsure if this actually happened, or if I was just dreaming. Now that I know you saw the same thing, I know it was real. My grandma suggested that I tell my brother that I spoke to her about it, and I am seriously considering doing so. I mean, this for sure confirms that what we saw was not a normal moose. I had some thoughts thinking it might have just been a handicapped or dysfunctional moose. But by the way my grandma said it tried to communicate with her and convince her, I knew it was the same thing that my brother and I encountered, as it too tried to talk to us. Apparently, she had already told this story to my mom and grandpa, but they just brushed it off and said it was either an injured moose or she was dreaming. Hearing about this story just made me all the more scared, but at the same time curious about what the creature actually was, and what was its purpose. Was he trying to lure us into the forest? Was he actually trying to help us with something? Hopefully, I get some more clarification the more I talk to people about it. I ended up sending some pictures of Wendigo and Skinwalkers to her, and she definitely saw resemblances between them. That all sent shivers down my spine. To all of the people reading this, if you ever encounter a weird-looking creature with antlers, do not speak with it, or even acknowledge their presence. That's what they want. So this is a story about an experience I had late last year. I was in Dorset, UK, the night before Christmas Eve. Opinions are welcome as I can't really explain it, and everyone I tell the story to thinks I'm just crazy or I'm making it up. What makes me think this may not be a skinwalker is that I've always heard that they won't enter a person's home unless you specifically invite them in, unless it took the open window as an invitation. In addition, I have nothing which to explain the orb and flashes unless I'm really losing my mind. Either way, I don't claim to have any literary ability. I also didn't know anything about skinwalkers until I tried to figure out what this thing was. I'll just tell it like I experienced it. I was staying with my parents for a while in my old bedroom. We had picked up the house cheaply just 3 years prior, when its former elderly owner suddenly passed away in one of the bedrooms. A friend and I had been hanging out for a week or so, enjoying the holiday, playing video games, going for short walks with my sister's dog on the nearby beach surrounding the fields. On the 22nd of December, this friend left to go spend Christmas with his own family, and not knowing what to do with my newfound bedroom for the evening, I decided to go to sleep early, around 9 p.m. for a change. My bedroom is on the second floor, and my window was left open a few inches to let in a cool breeze. My sleep was restless. I kept waking and re-entering sleep every half hour until around midnight, when I finally drift off for good, or so I thought. Now, I don't often have dreams, and if I do, I don't remember much of them, but the dream that I had this night was stranger than the others, and it is relevant to the rest of the story. I was seeing through the eyes of another person as they emerged from a bush in one of my neighbor's gardens. They were steadily and silently approaching my own garden, climbing over a 6-foot wooden fence as easily as you or I climb a set of stairs. I couldn't see any hands or feet. It was as if it was a Steadicam just gliding over the ground. My sister's dog was asleep on the tiny patch of grass near the tree, and I came to a stop directly beneath my open window. The viewpoint then switched to resting on a branch near the top of the tree in my garden, watching the back of a pale white humanoid figure silently glide up the side of my house and looking at me through my open window. This is where I woke up, covered in a cold sweat, and decided that I should just lay there for a while with my eyes closed. All I could hear was the wind in the trees outside, as I thought about the dream, hoping to remember some more of it. Without warning, the silence was broken by my sister's dog barking like crazy. About 10 seconds later, it turned to yelping before fading into silence once more. Thinking it was squirrels or something else spooking the dog, I planned to go back to sleep, but then I started to hear slow scratching sounds on the wooden paneling on the outside of the house. It only covers the second floor, so I reasoned that it couldn't have been my sister's dog. So I sat up, intending to take a look outside, pausing momentarily to glance sideways at the radio clock illuminating the room with its yellow-orange glow, and of course, it's 3:33 a.m. exactly. This is when the unexplainable intense fear washes over me, stronger than I have ever felt before or since. It definitely felt like something was in the room with me, like I was somehow intruding or being watched. I thought I could hear a low murmuring coming from all around me. I saw something move across the ceiling and come to rest behind the room's main light shade. I closed my eyes and laid down again for reasons I can't explain even now, as if I was being willed by an outside force. Then, with my eyes still closed, a floating white orb appeared roughly where I had seen the shadow on the ceiling, accompanied by the sound of 1,000 lighters being sparked at once. It was almost deafening. There was a bright white flash that filled the room with light that I could clearly see with my eyes still closed. As the flash subsided, I was left in total darkness again. I immediately sat upright, wondering what just happened. Slowly, I reached for the bedside light with my right arm, and it wouldn't turn on. Memories of unplugging it so my friend could recharge his laptop at some point earlier in the week came flooding back to me. It was only then when I was made fully aware of the dark humanoid figure now standing completely motionless in the center of my room, beneath the main light, as it unnaturally snapped its head to the left to watch my arm reaching for the light. It slowly turned its head back onto me, and I couldn't make out any facial features. It was as if its skin absorbed all light like a black hole. I stayed there for a good 2 minutes, just paralyzed in fear, not really comprehending what it was I was looking at. Then it abruptly, in a very jerking, unnatural movements, took a single step towards me and extended its open hand, ending in long, almost talon-like fingers. As it came even closer, I felt fear increase proportionally to its distance from me. It was almost touching my face when fight or flight mode engaged. Without even thinking, I jumped out of bed and slammed on the wall to turn on the main light switch. My head flicked back to cast a fresh eye on the thing, where inside of a fraction of a second, it crossed the room and threw itself out the open window, clearing the garden in a single jump before disappearing into the night at an impossible speed. I went downstairs to check on the rest of the house, and to make sure my parents were okay. Into the garden, I found my sister's dog whining softly, and attempting to hide behind the tree, shaking. I can't stop thinking back to that experience and wondering what would have happened if I stayed put, or even taken its hand. I've always been a bit of a skeptic, ever since I was a kid. Scary stories don't faze me, creepy games never frighten me, and whenever I hear something weird at night, I instantly assume it's something normal, an animal, or just the house settling. Despite this, something very unsettling happened to me the other day, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. I think it's the first time in years I've been genuinely frightened. I live in a forest area in the US. Me and my girlfriend live in a large cabin, and although there are no roads nearby, our nearest neighbors are at least a mile away. We also have 2 cats, one of which sleeps in the bedroom with us, while the other often goes out at night and does whatever cats do when they're out of sight. Anyway, I like to stay up late at night and sleep late into the morning, whereas my girlfriend's an early bird. It was 1 in the morning and I was watching a crappy TV in the living room while my girlfriend slept in the bedroom. I was beginning to grow tired when I heard something outside, near the cat door. For clarity, our cat door uses an electronic chip, so only our cats can use it. I assumed it was just one of the cats coming in or leaving the house, and I just ignored it. Then I heard it again. It sounded like something thudding against the cat door. It happened several times at random intervals, until I lost my patience and decided to go open the door. Clearly, the cat was having trouble getting in. I never thought about it at the time, but it was weird because we feed our cats well, and they're very lean rather than chubby. I passed the bedroom and peered in as I walked past, to see if my girlfriend heard the noises. She was fast asleep, but the cat that sleeps with us was staring at the window. I call her name. Nothing. She keeps staring. I shrugged it off and kept heading towards the kitchen. The back doors are through there, by the way. Anyway, so I reached the back door and saw a dark shape through the translucent door. I sighed, expecting the cat to be out there, and opened the door. It took me a moment to open the door, and I saw the cat tense up as I opened it. The door opened fully. I froze. It wasn't my cat. Whatever it was had started moving before I opened it up. I only caught a glimpse of a distorted figure, kind of like a tailless dog, bolting, and I mean absolutely pelting it. I freaked out and slammed the door shut. What the hell was it? I wasn't sure. My natural skepticism kicked in, and I assumed it was just my other cat, and I had merely startled it. Perhaps the darkness made it appear larger. Nevertheless, I was creeped out, and I decided to go to sleep. As I slipped into bed, I realized something horrifying. The second cat was asleep on the rug. It took a while to get to sleep that night. Everything seemed normal until a few hours later. I awoke to a strange feeling of dread. Something wasn't right. My girlfriend was fast asleep. I held my breath and heard something creaking by the door. It sounded too loud to be one of the cats. It was as if a person was walking about. I reached toward my bedside cabinet and flicked on the lamp. The room was illuminated and I saw something just standing outside the door, staring at me. The same twisted figure I had spotted earlier outside. It wasn't very tall, maybe a little over 5 feet, but it was its face that scared me the most. I only caught a glimpse of it, but what I saw will stay with me forever. It looked like a dog, but with an elongated face and almost human-like eyes. You know that weird, distorted snarl dogs pull when they're pissed off? It had that expression. I instantly started yelling profanities as I scrabbled backwards, trying to straighten up. The creature turned and sprinted down the hall. I heard it dash outside and go past the window behind us, just above the headboard. I managed to look out as my girlfriend started to panic as she woke up fully. We both caught a glimpse of whatever the hell that thing was as it dashed off into the woods near our home. Grabbing my trusty shotgun from underneath the bed, as well as a couple rounds from the ammunition box that sits next to it, I ran out of the room in my underwear and rounded into the kitchen. The door was open. I'd forgotten to lock it when I saw the thing originally. I haven't seen it since, but we still live in our cabin. But I've bought sturdy locks for all the main doors and windows in the house, and always check the exit points at night. I also go to bed a bit earlier than I used to, so I'm asleep when the freaks of the night start to wake up. I've read a bunch of forums, and the only thing that I can compare it to, based on what I saw, is a skinwalker. If you know anything about these things, please let me know. As I am writing you this, other skinwalkers are in front of my house. They are surrounding me. If I die, I want you to know what happened. I stand alone, nobody to help me. I hear them howling. By my estimation, there are at least 5 of them. But let's tell the story from the beginning, shall we? My childhood was nice. It was going smooth and buttery until my 8th birthday. After a long day and a party with my friends, summer heat slowly disappeared as the night came on. I was out in the backyard playing with my Spider-Man figure. I was feeling safe and happy, until my dog shot across the yard and ran off into the forest. I should probably describe the dog. He was a big Siberian husky, white. His name was Johnny. Anyways, back to the story. The dog shocked me. Then in a second, I went from feeling safe to feeling like I could die at any moment. Right then, fog rolled into my backyard. I could see the outline of a figure standing in it. Then, a wolf howled. It sounded like a wolf at first, but it sounded wrong. I screamed for my dad, who came out running. I told him about Johnny and the wolf howling. He then said, "Son, there's no wolves in this country." He ushered me inside and grabbed his shotgun and went searching for Johnny. He came back empty-handed, but I knew something happened. That he saw something. I could see it in his eyes. That night, he stayed awake on the couch, gripping his shotgun until the sun came up. From that point on, every night the fog would roll in our backyard, and the figure would start howling. As I grew older, I could not be convinced by my father it was just a wolf. So, on one winter evening, he sat me down in the couch by the fireplace and told me a story. "Son, long before men ruled the earth, other creatures lived on it. So, naturally, when we came, they felt angry. They wanted to get rid of us. That thing you see every night howling is one of them. They are called skinwalkers. They are sort of shapeshifters. They can take the shape of a human or animal. Also, they take their memories, their voice, their life. But you can always recognize the skinwalker from the real deal. When they speak, there is something wrong in their voice, a certain amount of something sinister. My son, I have dealt with skinwalkers all my life. Looks like you'll have to do that too." He then gave me an unmarked red leather-bound book and told me to read it in its entirety. And so I began. In it was everything about skinwalkers. How do they live, and what they do, what do they feed on, and how to hunt them. My father then moved away to the city when I was 20. He knew then I could guard the front line. Fast forward a few days ago, I was in the backyard of the same house. Me, now a fully grown male, 25 years old, I was guarding, and an idea came to my mind. I'm gonna catch that skinwalker. So I prepared my traps, some signs, and put my lucky necklace on my neck. I poured holy water everywhere, in the sprinklers too, put salt in my shotgun gauges, also in my sniper rifle rounds. Night came, and by my expectations, at around 10 p.m. the fog came in. What was driving me to hunt this skinwalker was this. I can't have a family with this thing around us. Why, you may ask, because this skinwalker didn't do anything to me. Wrong. He got my dog. My dad found it in the creek a few days later after he was hunting. He took a good friend of mine. I didn't want my kids to live a life like me, to be scared constantly, to not have a teenage life just because this thing came every night and attacked my house. So when the fog came, I got ready on my roof and waited. After only 10 minutes of waiting, it was here. He started doing his usual, howling and throwing stuff at my house, mostly animal carcasses. And then, out of nowhere, I turned the sprinklers on. It screamed so hard it was shaking my house. Then I shot at it with my silver bullet with some salt. It came down, but I knew it wasn't dead. It was just unconscious. I then came down from the roof. I didn't turn off the sprinklers. I picked the thing up. It must have weighed around 300 pounds. But I was a huge dude, 6'8". I have trained for this my entire life. I was ready. I took it into my basement and strapped it into a chair, placed in a cage that had electricity running through its bars. I then waited for it to wake up. When it did, it started howling immediately. It changed from its wolf shape to one of my dead friends just to hurt me. I left it there to rot. But then, it started howling again. It called another. This brings me to this moment. It's still howling. They are surrounding me. I have ammo and food in my bunker. My house was built like a fortress, but the chance of survival is small. I will try to stop them, to save you. So if I die here, take my example. Be prepared for everything. Last night, I had an experience with what I believe to be a skinwalker. I was sleeping on my couch. I'm in the process of remodeling my bedroom. It had been storming on and off all night, but in that moment, the wind was only blowing. It was about 1 in the morning when I was woken up by a very strange noise. I can't describe it that well, but it sounded like an animal call, except as if a human was making the sound. It was a long, deep noise that kept on going, almost like a foghorn. It sounded like it was right outside my window, in my backyard. In case you're wondering, I live in a country near the Ozark Mountains, and directly on the Trail of Tears. I've lived out there, in the middle of the woods my whole life. I've heard and seen everything: bears, deer, cougars, raccoons, coyotes. But the sound that I heard that night wasn't like anything that I've ever heard. I'm not going to lie, it scared the absolute hell out of me. I immediately went to my bedroom. I have a window that looks into my backyard as well. I wanted to see whatever it was, but I didn't want to pull back my living room curtains to come face to face with it. I couldn't see anything through my bedroom window, so I turned around and started walking back to the living room. Then something hit my window. It wasn't strong enough to break it, it just sounded like someone hit the palm of their hand on the glass. At that point, I went back to sleep and ignored the sound. Looking back on it, I should have recorded it, and I tried when the noise came back the next night, but every time I took out my phone, it stopped. Today, I built up enough courage to go into my backyard and to investigate. There were loose limbs everywhere. I had a bonfire a few weeks ago. The remaining ashes had been dug through, not blown by the wind or damaged by the rain. No, it looked like something took their hands and dug a hole. I did some research, and I think it's a skinwalker. I'm no stranger to these things. I've heard lots of stories about them, and considering that I've seen several things walking through the woods through my lifetime, I'm starting to become really convinced. So this happened to me last September, and I'm writing about it now, only because I've read so many experiences people have had that I'm at a point where I'm more comfortable talking about what happened. My best friends live out by a country farmland in Michigan. The land is very old and probably traces back to the Native Americans. There is even a nearby road called Indian Trail. Well, it was around 1:30 a.m. and I was leaving their house. And to paint a visual of what their yard looks like, the driveway is in the shape of a U, and they have many cars parked except for this one part near the front of the house where there is a giant evergreen tree nobody ever parks in front of, and a light that hangs over to illuminate this area. Where my car was parked is the furthest to the left, and I have to walk across the entire yard and past the tree in order to get to my car. Well, as I left that night, I reached about the center of the yard and suddenly felt my heart rate was skyrocketing. This happened out of nowhere, and I started running to get to my car as fast as I could. As I got into my car, my front windows were foggy, and as I started the car, there was a small patch clearing up at the bottom of the windshield where I could see clearly. And that's when I saw the thing squatting by the evergreen tree and watching me. I have never had that feeling as though my body was burning at 300 degrees and my heart was in my throat throbbing. I looked through that small patch of my window, which was now growing larger, and the thing wasn't moving. It was still frozen in place and squatting. It was not human, and it was not animal either. My body went numb. All of this happened in a matter of 30 seconds, and I backed out of the driveway and drove down the dirt road to get home, probably driving 70 miles an hour. I immediately repressed what happened to that point, and I don't even remember how I got home. The next day comes around, and I go over to their house again, and I was sitting in my friend's room, and I told her that I saw something in her yard last night. And she freaked out at me because she said it could have been a robber or a dangerous person. And I told her no. It wasn't a person. I described it as the khaki man, because it looked like those saggy khaki tan pants, but only the entire body was that texture. The head was bald with ears folded into the scalp, and pitch black beady eyes, like round buttons. Well, her husband overheard me talking about this, and he entered the room halfway into the story and waited for me to finish, and told me that him, his dad and brother have all seen it at once, and they called it Gollum, like the creature from the Lord of the Rings. I didn't know what it was, and they showed me a figurine of it, and it had similar resemblance to it. None of them ever seen it more than once. I told them that I didn't want to know anything more about it, and I tried to erase that this ever happened because it literally flipped my entire perception of this world around. Anything is possible. And while I've had paranormal experiences growing up as a child, I wasn't too scared about things like that. But to come across a creature that is not something my brain could have ever comprehended at this point. I believe that all kinds of things are out there. But all this time has passed since and I'm still traumatized from it. I don't want to live in fear and I still visit my friends frequently. But ever since then, they always walk me out if I'm leaving late at night. After a couple months passed, I decided that I wanted to know what it was that I saw. And after diving deep into online forums of people's paranormal experiences, I came across a story mentioning the term Skinwalker, which I never heard before, so I decided to look it up, and that's what sparked my interest on researching more. I have read tons of stories online about encounters others have had with skinwalkers, which led me to research more about Navajo Native American folklore, and the one who walks on all fours. A part of me thinks that it could have certainly been that, but another part of me is not so sure, because this thing almost looked alien, and not so much like a coyote, although we often hear coyotes in this area late at night. I described what this looked like to my friend who lives at the house, and she illustrated a spot-on picture of it that I'll attach here. I would love to hear from any of you with possible insight related to the subject of skinwalkers, as well as if you've seen anything like this. I have had some nightmares from it, and have thought about possibly talking to a Native American shaman who owns a shop nearby, but I'm not sure how I could approach a topic like that because it's a topic they don't like to speak about, which is why I wanted to share it here first. I told this story to some friends tonight, after not thinking about it for a while and remembered how odd and creepy it really is. The man who told me about this terrifying experience in the Colorado wilderness is one of those distinct relatives that everyone has. They're your third cousin, twice removed, or something to that effect. I'm not positive exactly how we're related, but he's an incredible guy. I'll call him Greg. Greg is a decorated green beret with a silver star to his name that he earned by capturing the leader of an Afghan sniper cell without incurring any casualties. Despite his status of a huge badass, and not his inconsiderable size, 6'3", 200 pounds, Greg is a teddy bear, just an extremely humble, kind person. I have a lot of experience in the outdoors and have lived in Colorado for most of my life, and Greg and I had an extended conversation about our adventures in the woods at my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. We were sitting on the couch wearing tacky holiday sweaters when a conversation turned to hunting. Greg mentioned offhand that he used to be an avid hunter, but had an experience that turned him off to it. He doesn't even like guns anymore, something I found surprising coming from an accomplished soldier. I pushed him to tell me what happened, and though he seemed uncomfortable with the idea, he finally did. I'm going to switch to first person now and try to write exactly what Greg told me. It was late October, which means elk season is up in the Indian Peaks wilderness, and I went up there to bag a few elk and just relax for a few days by myself. I parked the truck near a trailhead about 8 miles from where I would end up setting up camp, and was looking forward to the nice weekend in the woods with some nice peace and quiet after packing all my gear and getting ready. The first morning, I was in my deer blind, about 20 feet up in a tree with a cup of coffee and my rifle. The sun had just come up an hour or so ago. About 50 yards from my tree, the tree line ended and opened up into a big meadow where a lot of elk tended to roll through, and I could sight my rifle pretty well through the trees and could see most of the big grassy area. Maybe a couple hours had passed, which really isn't boring that deep in the woods. I just drank my coffee from my thermos and listened to the life around me, feeling the woods getting ready for winter. I couldn't believe my luck when I glanced over the meadow and saw a large group of elk had started grazing in the meadow. The silent animals plodded along, munching at the grass, oblivious to me watching. Among the group was one of the most beautiful elk I had ever seen. It was called a monarch, which means its antlers had 8 points each, something really rare. I quietly clicked the safety off my rifle and sighted in on it. When you're hunting an animal like this, you want to put the bullet right where the skull meets the spine, in order to sever the spinal column and kill it instantly and painlessly. The focus when you get in the zone is incredible. I swear I could feel the firing pin punch forward and the bullet leave the barrel as I pulled the trigger. That beautiful elk went down silently, and all the others scattered for the tree line. I was ecstatic about the shot and the elk as I climbed down the tree and set off for the meadow. I had left my rifle up in the tree, something I regretted soon, and I had only a small knife on me to gut the animal and drag it back to camp. As I was making the short walk between my tree and the meadow, I noticed that the woods around me were completely silent. Some of this is normal after you fire a gun in the woods, but for it to drag on this long was unsettling. I thought nothing of it and continued the short walk through the dense pines. As I was about to clear the trees and step into the meadow, I noticed something odd. I could see the elk's body lying in the grass through the trees, but there was something else there. There was what looked like another elk, antlers and all, on the opposite side of the dead elk from where I was coming to walk out of the tree line, almost looking as though it was gently nuzzling the other elk's dead body. This was weird. To see another elk treat a dead elk like this, they usually just scatter, but I continued to walk towards it, hollering in an attempt to startle the other elk off. It snapped its head up and looked at me. Over the body of its fallen friend, the strange new elk eyed me with its unafraid glare. I say glare because it didn't feel like an animal looking at me anymore. Its glassy black eyes gave me the same caught red-handed feeling that you got when your parents catch you when you're doing something wrong. I felt suddenly uncomfortable, out of place into the woods that I loved so much, and somehow hated and guilty. I no longer wanted the elk. I stopped dead in my tracks and watched this animal as it eyed me angrily. What it did next gives me nightmares to this day. It stood up, and it was not an elk. The thing that stood before me on the other side of the dead elk must have been lying on its stomach, and put its arms down and pushed up, putting its legs under it. It reared back, glaring at me all along with its evil, glass eyes. My breath caught in my throat. Most of its body was at least somewhat human, but terribly emaciated and elongated. It appeared to stand 10 feet tall, not including the antlers atop of the elk head. It was bald everywhere but the neck up, and looked sickly pale pink. Its legs and knees bent backwards, like the back legs of an elk. This horrible, skinny, naked, unnatural thing just stood there, glaring at me with a hatred that was palpable. The woods around us were silent. It might have been seconds, minutes, or hours. I felt the disapproving parent feeling shift. I felt more like an ant under a shoe. I took a step back. My boots felt like 10 pounds. My body felt numb. And the noise of my footsteps was ear-splitting. I took one more and then turned and ran. Running through those thick woods is tough, but I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I passed under my tree with my $4,000 rifle still sitting in it without even slowing down. I ran all the way back to my camp, which must have been a mile before I stopped for a breath. It took me another minute to dare to look behind me. I was alone, but the woods around me were still silent and brooding. I wanted more than anything to pack up and go home, but I knew that I would not likely make it back to the car before nightfall, and I did not want to be exposed at night. I cooked an MRE in my tent and stayed there the rest of the day. When night fell, I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop myself from staring at every little noise. I kept thinking about the possible rational explanations for what I saw. Maybe there's a crazy guy out there who found an elk head and is wearing it around scaring people. But no explanation came up when I quailed the maddening fear that I felt. That horrible sense of being hated and guilty far from home. And nothing explained why that thing was 10 feet tall with inverted knees. As soon as the sun came up, I ran back to the blind and took it down. Then ran back to camp with my rifle and bag, packed everything up, and hiked out. I've never fired a gun in the woods since, and I don't ever intend to again. I'm not a spiritual person, but if that wasn't something in the forest telling me to leave it alone, I don't know what is. I can take a hint. I don't think I'll ever know exactly what that creature was, but I know what I saw. Next time you're up in the woods alone, be quiet, be respectful, and don't kill anything you don't have to. I thought at first Greg's story was too far-fetched to be true, but as he told it, I saw how truly scared he was. This confident, soft-spoken military man was shuddering through his story, hands shaking and face pale. I don't know what to make of it, but he said the area this occurred is one I'm quite familiar with, and it can be quite an eerie place. I have had a few experiences solo camping up there, but nothing on this scale. Sometimes being alone in the woods can feel like anything but. It just might be that there's some force out there, some inhuman creature that guards the woods. Just in case, I take extra care to be respectful whenever I'm among nature. You never know what could be watching. I had just gotten off Interstate 40 and was driving on US 191 north through the Navajo res in Arizona one night heading to New Mexico. I'm looking for a gas station, not a car on the secluded highway. It being too dark and I somehow took a wrong turn onto a dirt road. It was because of my lack of sleep. The sign read, Ganado. Still driving, trying to make sense of my direction, I ended up at this garbage dump site. I was completely lost and saw nothing. Just pitch black darkness with the only light of the moon and some wisps of clouds covering the small part of it. Miles of bushes, some small trees, and a cornfield. The dump site was a large area. Piles of garbage were stacked. Debris scattered the road and bushes. Deciding that I needed to figure out where I was, I stopped my car and put it in park. My AC was on and the smell of decaying fish hit my nose like a baseball bat to the face. Gagging, I turned off the AC, ready to look at my phone for Google Maps. The smell was foul, but I needed to get on the right track. My headlights had illuminated the area so I could see most of the piles. Then I noticed something was moving just near the pile. There was a small coyote digging through the trash. I could see it clearly with my bright headlights. But the weird thing was, I realized it wasn't a small coyote. It looked like a small build figure of a kid. The kid stood up quickly, looking at me. I could clearly see his face and what he wore. Swearing out loud, I could see that he was covered in black paint with a fur pelt wrapped around him that looked like it had been recently skinned. I noticed that it was the pelt of a small coyote. For a few seconds, everything registered in my brain. There in front of me stood a little boy about 12 years old, covered in black paint and wrapped in a small coyote pelt, digging through the trash looking for something. And now he had stopped what he was doing, standing there looking at me. I let out a yelp and the boy looked to my left. And as my head turned, nearly causing myself whiplash, there stood another, much larger figure in the brush. There stood a tall, heavy-built man covered from head to toe in paint. The parent. Also wearing a larger thin pelt of a coyote. He stood there staring at me, his face covered in red and black face paint. Shoulder-length, messy black hair hung limply down by his shoulders. He wore a huge quantity of turquoise necklaces, a silver concho belt around his waist, and silver bracelets that shined from both my headlights and the moon. It looked like it was teaching the little boy, his son, something at night. I could see his face from a distance, a stern, mean face. His eyes weren't normal. They were black, soulless, and beady looking. It was as if they were looking into my soul. Then he smiled from ear to ear. I saw his sharp teeth. What the hell? Again, I screamed bloody murder as he ran at my car. My foot above the gas, I made the decision not to try to run them over for fear of having my window busted and being dragged out into the bush. Screaming, my heartbeat hammering against my chest and trying not to have a heart attack, still gagging at the smell that worsened. I put the car in reverse, stepping on the gas, nearly running off the road as he ran towards me. As I was making a U-turn, I heard the sound of what I know were his nails scratching the back of my car. I put the car in drive, my throat hurt from screaming, but that was all I could do as I looked into my rearview mirrors to see him sprinting down the road catching up to me. 54 miles an hour on the dirt road, then onto the highway, another 70 to 80 miles per hour, hoping I wouldn't crash. Driving like a madman, fully awake, my thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of what I saw. I made it back onto Interstate 40 and kept driving, too afraid to stop, making it to New Mexico in record time. I kept my story to myself because of the backlash my friends and family would probably give me. So, this is a true cautionary tale to those late-night travelers. You may or may not see anything during the dead hours on secluded reservation roads. Just be careful what roads you take. Never having lived by myself before, I was pretty scared about what to expect. I graduated college and had landed a pretty decent job with a generous starting salary. But the downside was that I had to move far away from where I was currently living with my parents. It's been about 3.5 weeks since I moved out and I've been getting along pretty well by myself. Even in college, I had a roommate and was only 30 minutes away from my parents' house. Now, I'm living alone 2 states away from my family, so I think that I took the sudden change pretty well. I don't know if it's because of the recent stress about moving and everything, but I've been having the same reoccurring nightmare for the past couple of weeks. I'll wake up in the middle of the night covered in sweat, heart pounding, not remembering why I'm so scared, only to have the details of my dream come flooding back to me. Most of the time, I don't even go back to sleep because I'm so scared that I'll dream it again. I don't want to tell my parents about this because they're stressed enough as it is, with me living alone and so far away for the first time in my life. But it's starting to eat me alive. I've gotten very little sleep and it's beginning to show at my new job. I would say that one of the creepiest parts of my reoccurring nightmare is that I keep having these out-of-body experiences while I'm dreaming. I don't know how common out-of-body experiences are, but I think that having one every night for 2 weeks in a row is pretty rare. To understand the rest of my dream, you have to know the general layout of my apartment building and the room where I live. It's a pretty big building, 6 stories tall, and about 100 yards wide. There is a large set of woods located behind the apartment building that stretches on for a good couple of miles. But I've never been back there in real life because the woods give me the creeps. I live on the 3rd floor, and the window in my bedroom has a full view of the woods behind the building. My dream always starts out the same. I'm standing behind the apartment building, looking into the wall of trees that sits before me. It's in the middle of the night and the moon is shining overhead, casting a low, white light over everything. I'm standing out in the cold with nothing on but a t-shirt and my underwear. I know I'm dreaming, but there is an astounding amount of detail in what I can remember. I remember feeling the cold grass beneath my uncovered feet, and the rhythmic sound of crickets as they sing in the night. I also remember the woods. Every time my dream starts, I'm looking into the woods, but I have this feeling, call it intuition, that I'm waiting for something. For what? I don't know. Despite all the light that's coming down from the soft glow of the moon, the trees in front of me are dark. They vanish into blackness as they get further and further away from me. After a couple of minutes of standing there in the cold looking for nothing, I turn around and start walking toward the apartment building. I go up to my room and walk in. The lights are off, but I can navigate through the darkness using the small amounts of moonlight shining through the windows. The door to my bedroom is always cracked open a little bit, so I quietly walk in and there I am. Another me, fast asleep in my bed. I watch myself sleep for a couple minutes and then wake up. Despite the dream not appearing scary in any way, I always wake up full of fear and have to calm myself down by drinking a cold cup of water to steady my nerves. Every time I've woken up so far, I've never dared to look out the window. I'm too afraid that I might see something. See what? I don't know. 13 days now, I've had the exact same dream, 13 days in a row. I'd start out behind the building, shivering in the cold of the night. I watch the woods for a couple of minutes, then walk back into my apartment. I enter my bedroom and watch myself sleep for a little bit. Then I wake up. It's gone on like that for almost 2 weeks. Until last night. It started out the same as every other dream. I was behind the building in the glow of the moonlight, shivering from the cold, standing in front of the dark wall of trees, looking for nothing and listening to the crickets sing. Something was different though. Something inside me had changed. There was an indescribable, overwhelming sense of dread that was not there before. I was afraid. Impossibly afraid. I shivered again, not from the cold, but from fear. For the past 13 days, I had this very strong feeling, call it intuition, that I was standing in front of those woods for a reason. Some part of me was always saying that I was there waiting for something. Standing there last night, I can say with certainty that whatever was waiting for me had arrived. The atmosphere around me felt different. The sort of feeling you get when you know you're not alone. I wanted to turn around and run, but my body wasn't letting me. Out of nowhere, the crickets stopped singing, and everything went silent. I could hear leaves crunching in the distance. I tried to run, but I didn't budge. The crunching leaves grew louder, closer. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. I heard a twig snap several yards in front of me, and I saw something advance from the darkness. I turned around and started walking towards my apartment. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My body wasn't allowing me. I could still hear the crunching leaves behind me, impossibly close. I knew if that I turned around, I would see it, the thing that I'd been waiting for. As I was walking back to the apartment, I was certain that something was walking in the darkness behind me, something dangerous and demonic. I made it into the building and walked in, closing the door behind me without turning around. Whatever was following me did not make it into the building. I was about to let out a heavy sigh of relief, but stopped. I heard something behind me. It was very faint, but in the stillness of the night, I could hear it as clear as day. I turned around reluctantly and looked at the door to the outside. There was a long small window on the door, and through the door, I could see the silhouette of a dark figure standing from just outside the door. The sound that I heard was its claw-like fingers tapping on the glass. It was a mocking gesture. If it wasn't for the lack of light, I would probably seen it smiling at me as well, quietly saying that it was going to get me and there was nothing that I could do about it. The tapping stopped and it moved away from the window into the darkness. I turned back around and went up to the 3rd floor where my apartment was. I entered and walked over to my bedroom door. I quietly walked in and froze. My other self wasn't in the bed this time. I was standing in front of the bedroom window, looking down at the woods below. My other self turned around, looking at me. I don't know if it was because of the lack of light in the room, but I couldn't make out any facial features. My face was just one pale blur of color with 2 specks of blackness for eyes. My other self went back to looking out the window. I slowly walked over to him and looked out the window myself. There was something right on the edge of the tree line looking up at us. It looked like a shadow, a dark outline standing in front of the wall of trees. It turned around and walked into the woods. My other self whispered something to me. It was so quiet, it was like I thought it rather than heard it. Get out. Then I woke up. It was 4 o'clock in the morning and the sun wasn't out yet. I sat up in my bed, my heart still pounding uncontrollably. I looked towards the window but didn't get up. What was I so scared about? I had a stupid nightmare. I've never believed in the supernatural, why the hell would I start now? I was starting to get angry with myself for being scared by a dream. I got up and went over to the window out of spite rather than curiosity. I wanted to show myself how stupid I was being. I looked down and scanned the tree line. There was nothing. I scolded myself for acting so childish and was about to look away when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. It was quick, but I thought I saw something retreat back into the woods near the trunk of one of the trees. My heart was pounding again and I felt lightheaded. I went into the kitchen and turned on the light before pouring myself a cup of water. I sat there in the light until the sun came up. I called in sick to work and decided that I was going to go apartment hunting instead. As I was leaving the building, something caught my eye. I went back to the front door and stared at the small, long window. I put my hand on the glass and moved it back and forth. There were small scratches etched into the glass. I didn't want to sleep in my apartment tonight, so I got a hotel room instead. I still don't want to fall asleep. Whatever is happening, real or not, I'm scared. I don't know what to do besides wait. Wait for what? I don't know. I know this sounds totally crazy, and I probably wouldn't believe it if it didn't happen to me. I've never been a believer in the paranormal, but honestly, I have no idea what to make of what happened last night. I will say it again before you read this that it sounds insane, but please know I am telling the truth. I wasn't drunk or high, and I was with a friend of mine who saw the exact same thing. I go to college in a smallish school in Wisconsin. One thing this school is known for is having crazy parties out in the surrounding woods. I know it sounds stupid, but it's the only way to make sure that Campus PD doesn't come and shut it down. I haven't ever been to one of these parties. I've had difficulty with anxiety. But after 2 years of therapy and medication, I finally decided I wanted to go to at least one party before I graduate. I'm a senior. So anyway, I talked to my friend Gina, who's known as a bit of a party girl, and she tells me there's going to be a big party in the woods this Thursday. A lot of kids at my school don't have class on Friday, so we make plans to go. So last night, me and her head down a trail into the woods with flashlights, and we joke about how creepy it was. Everything was going smoothly at first, until we go down a smaller trail that was only 2 feet wide instead of the normal road-sized trails that we usually go through. I was kind of freaked out, but didn't say anything because I assumed she knew where we were going. So we follow this trail a bit longer, and eventually come to this sort of clearing, where the trees aren't too dense and we could see a towel and a few bottles on the ground. At this point, my friend tells me that she's got a bit turned around, but knows that we're very close to the party because she's been at the clearing before, and she starts calling out, "Hey," hoping someone would hear her and shout back. When this doesn't work, she takes out her phone and calls one of her friends that she said was going to meet her at the party. The friend answers and apparently tells her where they were. Gina then tells me she knows where they are and that we're close. I joke that she better not get me killed, and as we nervously laugh, we hear a nya, nya, nya sound coming from behind us, followed by what sounded like a cross between a whistle of an old train and somebody blowing. We then turn around thinking, what the fuck was that? We shine our flashlights on a deer standing up on its hind legs with one arm against a tree looking at us. I know it sounds stupid, but just the way that it was watching us and standing up there was the most unsettling thing I have ever seen in my life. My friend takes off running and I'm still standing there looking at it, trying to make heads or tails of it before I start running after Gina, trying not to be left alone with this thing. Luckily for me, Gina runs into a tree and I catch up with her and start yelling at her about leaving me alone, when we hear another whistling sound out to the left of us and turn our flashlights to see another deer looking at us. But this one was walking toward us on its hind legs, but not like a person, like a dog. It gets close but walks behind the tree with only its head and neck poking out, watching us. I've never been so scared in my life and start to cry and yell at Gina, telling her to call the cops. Like that would do any good. At this point, I honestly thought I was going to die. I was just so scared that we had heard another whistle sound somewhere in the woods behind us. We heard a rustling sound in the woods and we were sure that this was it. This is where we were going to die. But instead walked out a giant. I mean giant. Like newfound size, but with short hair like a lab. Black dog. The dog then walked right up to us, looked at us for a bit, and looked at the deer behind the tree, which then started to make a nyah, nyah sound, like we had heard earlier, but the dog just stood there looking at it, not growling or barking or anything, just staring. The deer then started to make a huge coughing sound, but the dog stared at it without making a noise, before turning around and just ignoring it, and walking over to us and started barking and baying. A minute later, a professor who I'd taken a class with sophomore year burst through the brush and started yelling at Baron, his dog who had apparently run away into the woods. He was really confused to see us, but saw that we were crying and offered to take us back to his house and drove us back to campus. I haven't slept since that night, and I've been all over the internet trying to make sense of what I saw, and I think it was a skinwalker. I know this sounds totally crazy, and I probably wouldn't believe it if it didn't happen to me. I've never been a believer in the paranormal, but honestly, I have no idea what to make of what happened last night. I will say it again before you read this that it sounds insane, but please know I am telling the truth. I wasn't drunk or high, and I was with a friend of mine who saw the exact same thing. I go to college in a smallish school in Wisconsin. One thing this school is known for is having crazy parties out in the surrounding woods. I know it sounds stupid, but it's the only way to make sure that campus PD doesn't come and shut it down. I haven't ever been to one of these parties. I've had difficulty with anxiety, but after 2 years of therapy and medication, I finally decided I wanted to go to at least one party before I graduate. I'm a senior. So anyway, I talked to my friend Gina, who's known as a bit of a party girl, and she tells me there's going to be a big party in the woods this Thursday. A lot of kids at my school don't have class on Friday, so we make plans to go. So last night, me and her head down a trail into the woods with flashlights, and we joke about how creepy it was. Everything was going smoothly at first, until we go down a smaller trail that was only 2 feet wide instead of the normal road-sized trails that we usually go through. I was kind of freaked out, but didn't say anything because I assumed she knew where we were going. So we follow this trail a bit longer, and eventually come to this sort of clearing, where the trees aren't too dense and we could see a towel and a few bottles on the ground. At this point, my friend tells me that she's got a bit turned around, but knows that we're very close to the party because she's been at the clearing before, and she starts calling out, "Hey," hoping someone would hear her and shout back. When this doesn't work, she takes out her phone and calls one of her friends that she said was going to meet her at the party. The friend answers and apparently tells her where they were. Gina then tells me she knows where they are and that we're close. I joke that she better not get me killed, and as we nervously laugh, we hear a nyah, nyah, nyah sound coming from behind us, followed by what sounded like a cross between a whistle of an old train and somebody blowing. We then turn around thinking, what the fuck was that? We shine our flashlights on a deer standing up on its hind legs with one arm against a tree looking at us. I know it sounds stupid, but just the way that it was watching us and standing up there was the most unsettling thing I have ever seen in my life. My friend takes off running and I'm still standing there looking at it, trying to make heads or tails of it before I start running after Gina, trying not to be left alone with this thing. Luckily for me, Gina runs into a tree and I catch up with her and start yelling at her about leaving me alone, when we hear another whistling sound out to the left of us and turn our flashlights to see another deer looking at us. But this one was walking toward us on its hind legs, but not like a person, like a dog. It gets close but walks behind the tree with only its head and neck poking out, watching us. I've never been so scared in my life and start to cry and yell at Gina, telling her to call the cops. Like that would do any good. At this point, I honestly thought I was going to die. I was just so scared that we had heard another whistle sound somewhere in the woods behind us. We heard a rustling sound in the woods and we were sure that this was it. This is where we were going to die. But instead walked out a giant. I mean giant. Like newfound size, but with short hair like a lab. Black dog. The dog then walked right up to us, looked at us for a bit, and looked at the deer behind the tree, which then started to make a nyah, nyah sound, like we had heard earlier, but the dog just stood there looking at it, not growling or barking or anything, just staring. The deer then started to make a huge coughing sound, but the dog stared at it without making a noise, before turning around and just ignoring it, and walking over to us and started barking and baying. A minute later, a professor who I'd taken a class with sophomore year burst through the brush and started yelling at Baron, his dog who had apparently run away into the woods. He was really confused to see us, but saw that we were crying and offered to take us back to his house and drove us back to campus. I haven't slept since that night, and I've been all over the internet trying to make sense of what I saw, and I think it was a skinwalker. When I was young, I lived in quite a small town in Queensland. The whole town was surrounded by trees in every direction for hundreds of kilometers, and we had so much room to play. This particular story is about the first time we got drunk. In the winter, the levels of water would drop significantly, enough for us to camp on the riverbed. My best mate's parents owned a pub at the time, so we were in charge of getting the drinks for our little trip, so we could finally cross that off our bucket lists. The place we had in mind was out near an old settlement, where a few creepy things have happened to us over time. So we made our way down to the riverbank, which was low on the side we came in and really high on the other side. You couldn't see the other side through all of the trees on top, and it was kind of unnerving knowing that someone could be up there watching and you wouldn't know. There are about 7 of us kids in the camp, and our parents have no idea where we are or what we're doing. We lied and said we were staying at a friend's place. We set up camp and built a little shelter for all of us to sleep under. We got all set up and started drinking as the sun was setting. Soon, it was dark, and we were in full swing of mixing drinks and singing songs and throwing stuff into the water, and generally making a whole heap of noise. As we were starting to wind down, one of my friends said he saw something move at the top of the riverbank on the steep side. We all say that he is full of shit and should calm down, but he is adamant that someone is up there. So we all start calling out, "Come out, you coward," and other such things, being brave well beyond our years. To our surprise, a man wearing straggly clothes and no shoes comes out of the tree line, stands on the edge of the bank and just stares at us. We all go silent, waiting for him to do something, but for about 5 minutes he just stands there, and then he retreats back into the tree line. We talk amongst ourselves and get a bit nervous, but we soon forget it. About an hour later, the guy is back, but he isn't on the bank anymore. He is coming out of the shadows from the other side of the bank and entering our camp. He comes over and stands next to the fire, joins our group of 12-year-old kids and just stands there. We are all officially a bit scared and don't really know what to do, so we just sat there in silence. Eventually, one of my friends gets up the courage to speak to him. "G'day, mate. How are you? Are you okay?" The guy just stares at my friend and then starts staring at each one of us for a little bit, spending time on each of us. My friend tries again. "Hey, are you okay? What's your name?" The man snaps his head back at my friend and stares at him wide-eyed for at least 2 minutes before answering. Without blinking, he says in a raspy whisper, "That's none of your fucking business." And he hisses like a cat. This guy just jumps back screaming and staring at the fire like it had just appeared and runs off, up the steep bank in record time. It was impossible to get up this thing, so we all just stand there, speechless. We decide that it's best if we just stoke up the fire, because it's about a 19-kilometer walk in pitch black to town, and we weren't confident of that. So, stoke the fire we did. We sat up for as long as we could, keeping watch, not really talking. We all eventually dozed off, one by one. When we woke up in the morning, everything was gone. All of our alcohol, all of our bags, all of our shoes and blankets, everything. The creepy thing is that none of us awoke as someone robbed us blind, and there was not a single footprint. We were sleeping in damp sand, so there should have been footprints everywhere, but there were none. It looked like we hadn't even been there. Needless to say, we bailed and ran almost all the way back to town. Our feet were all cut up and messy by the time we got back. We never told our parents about the camping trip, and I think we never will. About 6 weeks ago, I went into the wilderness of East Oregon with my 2-year-old hunting dog, a golden retriever named Reggie, to hunt for pheasant, partridge, and quail, and fly fish for steelhead, which is in the high rock desert and carves a deep valley through the sagebrush-coated hills and black rock cliffs. Something happened in that canyon that changed everything I know, or thought I knew, about the world we live in. I'll start with a bit of backstory before I get into the events. I did the same camping trip with 2 buddies last November during my dog's first bird season, and we were all psyched to have a round 2. Unfortunately, one of the dudes bailed because of work pressure, and the other because he needed time to prep for an interview. So, I decided to go alone. I've done plenty of solo camping and hunting before, and this time I had my bird dog, so I felt even better going alone. There's obviously no cell phone service out there, so I gave my girlfriend and some buddies my route and camping locations, and set out before sunrise on a Friday with plans to return late on Sunday. It's about a 3-hour drive to the stretch of the John Day River Basin where I was heading, and I got there around 9:30. It was around 40 degrees when I got out at the BLM parking area to stretch and started to get ready to set out. My dog was really stoked. He knows when we're hunting when I put on my bird pouch and bust out the shotgun, and I was happy as a pig in the mud. Sun was shining, and it had snowed a few days earlier, so the red, tan, black, and green sagebrush-coated valley we started hiking down into was shimmering. I had my big backpacking pack loaded to the brim with gear and a sidearm. I don't always carry a sidearm, but 3 days and 2 nights alone in an area infested with packs of coyotes, who don't scare me but would love a golden retriever snack, and a high density of mountain lions, which definitely scare me despite being cool animals. I figured why the hell not. We, my dog and I, rucked about 6 miles into a more open part of the valley where I wanted to spend the first night. It was around 50 degrees at this point and absolutely beautiful, while quite muddy with the snowmelt. I set up the tent on a little grassy plateau above the old trail, and put the dog in the tent with some water to chill for a bit to get his paws warmed up. I ate lunch and dumped most of my gear and set out with just my camelback, bird pouch, gun, and dog down further into the valley to start hunting. About as happy as a dude can be. It was slow hunting at first, but eventually we flushed a cubby of quail and a few hen pheasant. After about 4 hours, it was starting to get dark. We had 3 quail down and we were working our way back to the camp. This is where things got somewhat strange. Reggie was ahead of me and I was struggling through some thick brush to get back to the trail from the river when the dog bolted back through the gap he had gone through with his ears back and his eyes wide. He kind of huddled and paced anxiously behind my legs. It wasn't normal behavior for him unless he was startled by something like a door slamming or a leaf blower. I looked forward to where he came from and immediately thought cougar. I aimed my gun forward as if I was about to flush a bird and moved through the gap in the brush with Reggie reluctantly at my heels. I pushed into the opening below the trail and noticed out of the corner of my eye a body of tan fur low in the grass, and whipped to my right with a shotgun at my shoulder ready to shoot. I then saw hooves and then a face, and to the relief of the adrenaline throbbing behind my eyes, I realized it was a female bighorn sheep lying in the grass. She was shaking violently and her eyes were white with terror, and she was clicking her teeth through a slick of frothy drool and wheezing like a sick old horse. I couldn't see any obvious broken bones or lacerations on her, and she was quite young, maybe 2 years old, and there was nowhere she could have fallen from. I figured she was just sick and dying. I actually gave her a slight shrug as if to suggest, Mother Nature's a bitch, sorry girl, best of luck to ya, and had to drag Reggie by his collar to the left, away from the strange, frantic thing. I'd run into dying deer and elk in the Rockies where I grew up, and I knew that sometime soon, as if camp wasn't that far off, I'd hear the terrible noise of coyotes beginning to feast. For those who haven't heard it, when coyotes set upon a living meal, they yip, snarl, and screech a horrible chorus of death. I didn't look forward to hearing that old death song, if it was to come, because I knew it would scare the shit out of my dog. But hey, Mother Nature's a bitch. We got to the camp. I took some photos of the sunset, seared up a little quail with some potatoes, ate my dinner, fed the dog, had some sips of bourbon, and climbed into the tent. The last thing I remember is being anxious the coyotes would find the dying bighorn and wake us up. I woke up freezing cold, feet and hands numb, and had an immediate adrenaline surge. I fumbled around for my headlamp, and when I turned it on, I saw that my tent flap was halfway unzipped and my dog was gone. I kind of freaked the hell out, to be honest, and started screaming, Reggie, come! Reggie, come! Reggie! And as I slammed my numb feet into my boots and rushed outside, there was a low howl of wind and there was a bit of moonlight, so I could see the glimmering river on the other side of the valley. I had my revolver in one hand and the hunting whistle in the other, and stomped the campground screaming for the dog, and shining the light everywhere I could. Cougars are awake whenever they want, and coyotes are nocturnal, and I was looking for blood, or tracks, or anything. For those who haven't experienced it, when you lose your dog, there's some pretty extreme panic. Mine being coupled with waking up in the middle of the dark wilderness. I think it was because of the panic that I didn't realize that my tent flap had been unzipped, until about 60 seconds of yelling at him. I looked back at it with the headlamp and lit it up as it flagged in the breeze, and kind of pushed it out of my mind, figuring that Reggie could have pushed it or rolled into the tent flap and forced the zipper down. Then I saw eyes peer over a boulder a bit down the slope. I started pacing toward the eyes and pointed my revolver at the boulder below the eyes and said sternly, Reggie, come. Reggie! And the eyes looked away. I bolted down the slope and noticed something move on the top of the boulder. I moved around the rock and saw it was Reggie. He was sitting up there like I commanded him to sit with a treat in my hand, staring over the valley toward the river. He was shaking like he'd just come out of an ice bath, and with the light, I could see his breath like cigarette smoke in the cold air. I said something like, Reggie, what? Reggie, come. Heal, heal. But he wouldn't move, wouldn't even look away from the dark valley. Then I climbed on top of the boulder and put my arms around him, and it was almost like something released him. He immediately tweaked out and started snarling and crying and writhing to break free. but then noticed it was me and his tail started beating back and forth. His snarls were replaced with whimpers, and he literally tried to jump into my arms. I picked him up and jumped off the big rock and started trying to soothe him a bit. I was right outside the tent when I heard the noise I'll never forget. It's hard to describe with writing, but it sounded a bit animal and a bit like a guy trying to sing a long note of don't, 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 that increased with urgency and a hint of pleading. I threw Reggie into the tent and whipped around with a pistol, pointed it down the valley to where the noise had come. Right then, it was as if the valley itself exhaled. There was a giant windy ugh that engulfed the dark ridge. Honestly, for the first time in my life, I felt I might lose control of my bowels and crap my pants right here standing on the hillside. I could see all of the grass and sagebrush by the trees and the river start quivering in the gust. Reggie was barking like crazy, and I had just backed up into the tent and zipped it up mostly closed, leaving a bit to see out of. I tried to calm Reggie down while loading my shotgun. The seemingly demonic exhale of wind subsided, and Reggie curled up in my lap and whimpered while I just sat there with my revolver at my side and my shotgun pointed at the tent flap. Only then did I see it was about 3:50 a.m. and start thinking through what happened and what to do. I knew booking it the 6 miles up the valley in the dark to my truck was a huge nope. I had seen microbursts of wind before and knew the canyons and valleys were a prime spot for them, and reasoned that had been the case. Then I tried to think through the bird and the mammal species in that region that could have made that sound. There are wolves in Oregon, but not often in this area. And the don't sound was too deep for a coyote. I was thinking it could have been something like a swan or a big bird near the water. And what the hell was my dog doing all seized up and transfixed on the darkness on top of that rock? He had just gotten out and been confused and started becoming hypothermic or something. I really had no idea, and I couldn't figure out why I was so scared and on edge. I worked as a hunting and fishing and trekking guide in New Zealand and Patagonia after college, and grew up spending time in the wilderness in Colorado. I'd had run-ins with most of North American predator species. I'd stabilized people with head wounds miles from any road or trail. I'd dug someone out of an avalanche, and I can't remember of ever being that horrified and on edge before. I'm no Navy SEAL here, but I know how to keep my wits about me when things get tense in the back country, so I was pretty shaken up. After a couple hours, I could see the light in the sky, and then a semblance of daylight spilled into the valley. I still hadn't properly warmed up, but I threw all my layers and extra socks on, and zipped Reggie into the tent properly, and went out to poke around for a bit. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and no strange tracks to be found, other than bighorn and deer. My nerves settled a bit. Eventually, I made some coffee, ate a power bar, fed the dog, and kind of just sat there looking at Reggie. There were natural, reasonable explanations for most of last night's events. However, the one I couldn't get over was my dog. I got chills thinking about the freakish way he was frozen on top of that rock, staring into the darkness, and the way he came out of the trance once I touched him. I also couldn't get over how freaked out I was by it all once that microburst, demon sigh wind gust kicked up. I pet Reggie for a while and just watched him, almost willing him to communicate to me what he saw after he left the tent before I woke up. The wind picked up into a steady, cold sailing breeze, which did well in dissuading my plan to fly fish for the morning. I decided to break up camp and get packed up, either to keep going or to head back to the truck. I hadn't decided yet, but didn't want to wig out and bail on the weekend without actually having a good reason, other than weird stuff happening. I wasn't in any intelligible danger, which is metric number 1 in any outdoorsman's time to bail determination process. So I just didn't know what to do. After packing, I was sitting there with another cup of coffee when I heard something scuttling in the rocks up the valley above my right shoulder. Reggie heard it too, and bolted to the rise behind the tent and stared up the slope like he was pointing at a bird, hackles raised and everything. I walked over and stood behind him, expecting to see a deer or a bighorn, but only saw a little rock slide out of the scree slope about 100 yards off. Again, I thought cougar, as one could have definitely been spooked by us up into the steep boulder and cliff formations at the top of the ridge. Little rock slides happen without disturbance, but something didn't seem natural. Then the dog just bolted. He whipped around and sprinted down the slope away from me and the little rock slide above us faster than I may have ever seen him run. I screamed after him and wailed on my hunting whistle to try to get him to hold, but he went all the way up the trail before looking back at me. Maybe this was me finally coming to my senses, but I figured, screw it, we're out of here. I heaved my pack on and made my way to Reggie, who was whining and pacing now, while looking over my shoulder. Once there, he started straight up the trail toward the car, looking at me, almost begging me with his ears down, with a "dude, let's go" face I hadn't seen before. It really put the hair on my neck up. So I just fell in behind him, and we started the hike. It was slow going because it was uphill out of the valley, and I wasn't moving as fast while keeping my eyes to the ridgeline to my right and to the sagebrush meadow to my left toward the river. I had my gun loaded because I hadn't entirely abandoned the idea of hunting on my way out, even though Reggie wasn't nose down and looking at anything but the ridge and me. Again, like he was begging me to hurry up. Also, I was sketched out in general, and a loaded shotgun is a decent remedy for fear. After about an hour and a half, I knew we were probably no more than a mile from the car, because I remember the canyon wall on the right becoming almost a sheer cliff, with occasional slot canyons leading up from the trail. When we were right at the mouth of one of these little mini canyons leading to the cliffs, Reggie stopped. He froze again, like he saw a game bird looking up in the rocks. I thought maybe it was actually a quail, so I got my gun ready and took a few paces up the ridge to see if Reggie would hunt up like he normally would. But he started whining and pacing again, and even shaking a bit while whipping his head back and forth, scanning frantically up and down the hill. I was worried then. I knew he wasn't right. I looked behind me and saw something move between two large boulders. I aimed my gun, thinking again cougar, but I saw two hooves, thinking now bighorn or mule deer. I took a few steps up the steep slope toward the animal, seeing if I could spook it up the ridge and see what it was. And the wind started picking up, and there was sage twigs whipping around the little black rocked canyon. And right then, Reggie started going insane. He was snarling and yelling like I'd never heard before. But I started saying, "Reg, stop! Reggie, no!" while slowly wheeling the corner to see what the rest of the animal was. And that's when my entire life and understanding of the world changed. Behind that rock corner was definitely a bighorn sheep. It was standing on its back legs looking at the rock wall, with its front legs curled up grotesquely into its chest where I couldn't see them. It was shifting its weight back and forth between its back hooves, and it had massive curled ram horns I'd only seen on a few big males before. I was immediately jarred by the sight, and I think I blurted out something like, "Holy hell," but thought for some reason it was just stuck or wedged there, or had fallen in the vertical position from above. Then it slowly started stepping and turning around, staying entirely on its back feet. Then it whipped around to face me, and it definitely wasn't stuck. It was literally standing comfortably, like a man, on its back legs. It looked like a normal bighorn sheep, but its eyes were wide and terrifyingly human, and staring at my stomach or waistline. It was drooling a ridiculous amount of frothy slobber out of its clattering mouth. I was tripping and sliding backwards, and a half second from blasting this freakish ram in its face when it looked right up into my eyes and shouted, with a wheezing, boyish voice with a terrified, pleading urgency, "Please don't! Please don't! Don't! Don't!" I tripped and rolled down the trail, and Reggie was tearing up the path ahead of me. I leaped up and trained my gun right up at its spot. I saw the ram's horns sticking out and most of its face, as if it was peeking out behind the rocks like a child playing hide and seek, and it was still staring at me dead in the eye, then ripped its head back behind the rocks. I could hear it still, but it sounded like it was sobbing like a little boy, while repeating, "Please don't, please don't, please don't." As I was pacing backwards, I noticed that I was screaming at it like a savage, like I had done when running into black bears to try to scare them off, not saying anything intelligible, and also screaming for my dog so he didn't bolt a mile ahead. When I got 50 yards down the trail, I shot both my 12-gauge hunting loads down the empty trail into the dirt and kept walking backwards. Reggie was back at my heels at this point, but still whining and barking. I swear, I walked the whole mile backwards, scanning like a madman, hands white and stone gripped on my gun, until I got a glimpse of the valley opening where my truck was. Then I just bolted. I sprinted like a child running from a monster. Reggie stayed ahead of me, and when we were at the truck, I tore my keys out of my bag, threw the dog, bag, and gun into the car, and tore out of the valley back to the state highway like a drag racer. I stopped at the first town and tried to calm Reggie down, and myself, and I still didn't get cell service. I went to the gas station, not to get anything really, but just to interact with another human and make sure the ram monster, or my insanity, was isolated in the canyon. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because the first thing the woman said was, "You okay, hun?" I bought a Gatorade and drove back north to the interstate and straight home. I haven't slept right since. My diet is all messed up. I can't think at work. My dog is super jumpy and doesn't like walking at night anymore. Not sure what to do to get over my encounter with this talking, pleading, sobbing beast. But I know one thing for sure. I am not hunting or camping alone anymore. And I am never going to set foot in the John Day River basin as long as I live. Not a chance in hell. Rewind 2 weeks. It's the 4th of July. A few of my friends want to actually do something instead of lounge around in front of our computers like we do every day. There were 5 of us, me, Neil, Elijah, JD, and Neil's sister, Katie. Neil had the idea to go to his grandparents' house, as they owned a farmhouse. We live in Texas, so having that much space, especially with other houses being half a mile out, it was the perfect place to pop fireworks without getting into too much trouble. The drive from where we lived to their house was about a 40-mile drive. Unfortunately, the only car that we had at our hands was a 2-door, so trying to fit 5 of us into the car was hectic, to say the least. The drive was actually tolerable. 3 of my friends were in the back and found a comfortable, yet funny position to sit in the car. The music Katie was playing was helping a lot and definitely passed the time. We all bought some fireworks halfway there, and my friends jumped back into their designated position for another 20 miles. As we got there, Neil forgot to mention that his grandparents were out of town for the week, which made the experience ahead of us a lot better. All of us got out of the car except for Katie. who suggested that she get us all food and sodas for the night. She kept the fireworks in the back because she didn't want us popping any off while she was gone. She drove off and we were all left there without fireworks. So we did the next best thing, went to the pool in the back. Something that already put me off was that ranch sat considerably close to a forest. Neil even went the extra step to tell me that there's an occasional wolf that can be a hassle to deal with. Of course, I got nervous because I had nothing to defend myself with if one had jumped over the fence. He handed me a pocket knife, saying that there's a shotgun in the living room if something goes down. He mentioned that he was going to set up a game of Risk for us all to play while Katie was out, as the drive to the closest market was well over a couple miles out. So, Elijah and I sat poolside, telling stories to each other about stupid stuff that happened while we were in college. During our talk, I was staring out in the forest line, paranoid about the wolves that Neil teased me about. I saw something move. I couldn't tell since the porch light behind me was making it harder to see any details, but the way it moved made my heart jump. Elijah could see my body language as he leaned in to see what was there. He started to ask me what I saw, and I replied with a wolf on the tree line. He looked toward where I pointed, and he calmed down. "That's just Katie, dude. I think she was trying to scare us." He started calling her name, waving his arm and laughing, saying how she scared the hell out of me. Neil came out of the house, wondering what Elijah was screaming about. Then he saw his sister standing in the field. He started to laugh when Elijah told him what happened and how I was on the edge of my seat. JD came out of the house next, and Neil told him to help Katie with the bags and grab the fireworks. Katie, who was out in the field, started to wave back, but the wave definitely seemed out of place. It wasn't so much waving, but a sudden jerk, like if you were trying to pop your elbow. Elijah yelled for Katie to come back so we can start the party, but JD came back with a terrified look on his face. "Katie's not back yet. I just called her. She's still on the road towards Walmart." Their laughing stopped, and Elijah's face faded, and his arm fell into his lap with a thud. Everyone looked at the still jerking figure in the field. Then, she screamed. The scream was so loud, it sounded like it may as well have been a couple feet away. All of us scrambled, running back into the house. Slamming the door behind us, Neil shouted for us to lock the doors and grab the shotgun in the living room. I ran to grab the shotgun, as it was the closest thing to us, while the other two ran to each of the doors leading inside. Quickly, I grabbed the shotgun and stuffed a couple of shells in my pocket, running back to the kitchen where we came in from, and handed the shotgun to Neil. I pulled out the shells and sat them on the counter, and he loaded one in. JD came back nearly covered in sweat, freaking out and shouted, "What the fuck was that?" Just as scared as he was, I look at both of them. Elijah quickly joining us again. "You don't think it was a skinwalker? I read stories. I've been all over 4chan and creepypastas." JD tried to reassure us. "No, it can't be. That's Katie. I'm sure she's just trying to scare us." "Cut the bullshit, JD," Neil barked at him. "That scream wasn't human. You already called her, and you told us she was still going out." He turned back to the door, pushing the blinds slightly, to find Katie closer to us. It stood at the gates of the pool, illuminated by the light, and revealing that didn't look much like Katie at all. The hair was a mess, and the clothes looked tattered. Her skin was bruised. The one thing that caught our eye most was her face. The head was tilted, like it struggled to support the weight. The eyes were blank with emotion, and the jaw was agape. It raised an arm, jerking it like it did before in a mock wave. The jerking, however, started to get more violent as the entire body started to shake uncontrollably. Neil quickly closed the curtains and backed off. He orders us to sit behind the counter, He set himself in the gap leading into the kitchen with a gun aimed at the door. I was silent for what felt like an hour. The three of us continued to look at Neil, who was completely focused on the door. A massive, grotesque smell entered our noses, and all of us reacted appropriately. The horrid stench was like if you left groceries to ferment in a box in the summer heat, with a couple of carcasses as a garnish. It was definitely hard to breathe, tasting the smell in the back of your throat, even with your nose pinched. It was so bad, JD actually threw up. Then, without any warning, the smell was gone. The hot air that was the smell went away, and was easier to breathe. I was afraid to let go of my nose, but was rewarded with a breath of fresh air. Everyone took a couple of breaths to rid their lungs of the pungent smell that lingered before. Neil asked us if we were okay and replied, JD being the exception since he'd puked. We heard what sounded like a whine. It sounded like a mix between a dog and a child about to cry. It was coming from the porch door, but from the front where we came in from the car. All of us stood up, Neil moving forward as we stayed back. We knelt down by the stairs, still hearing this whining. It didn't hit me until we positioned ourselves, but it sounded like something was trying to talk for the first time, like an animal. In a raspy, but still high-pitched voice, I could make out a very small portion of what it was trying to say. Gee, fuck, hot. It kept repeating this, until it started to sound more enunciated, more human. What the fuck was that? It sounded like JD. Same accent, same speech pattern, same voice. JD started to shiver. His breath was getting shallow. He shouted back in a scared voice I'd never heard come from his mouth until now. Get out. Leave us alone. Get the fuck out. Leave us alone. Get out. The last words that we heard were in the same scream we heard when we saw it initially. It started to pound on the door. Not like it was trying to force itself in, but like an impatient knock. It started to scream in the same pitch we heard it when we initially saw it. Get out! Get out! Get out! It terrified all of us. The inhuman screams, the polite pounding on the door. I started crying. I thought this was it. Neil wasn't scared, like us. He was right pissed. He stood up storming towards the door, screaming. He swung open the door, pointing a shotgun at whatever was on the other side, pulling the trigger, filling all of our ears with the sound of a shotgun blast, and the ringing to follow. Neil stood at the door, huffing. His body language was wanting to rip this thing apart. I stood up, looking past his arm, seeing nothing but a shell on the ground. I looked up past his shoulders, seeing nothing on the driveway, and the road leading back to where we came. He turned around, the adrenaline fading away, and a shaky voice coming from his mouth. We're not staying here. JD, call Katie and tell her to get ready to go back home when she comes back. The rest of the time, all of us were in the kitchen. The shotgun sat on the counter with several shells near the butt of the gun. None of us wanted to say anything. None of us wanted to look at each other. It was nothing but silence until Katie called us. Neil quickly wrote a note, leaving it on the gun as we left. All of us hopped into the car, silent. Katie noticed our behavior and constantly edged us to tell her what happened. She pouted and put on her music to cheer us up. The only thing I could hear was the blood-curdling scream, telling us to get out. My background. My dad is full-blooded Navajo from northern Arizona, and my mom is white. I grew up in SoCal, but grew up going to the res every year and eventually moved and worked there. I'm not a skinwalker expert by any means, but I'll share what I know. The first experience I had was on one of my first solo trips without my parents, out to our ranch on the reservation. I went with my cousin and a few friends. Our ranch is pretty much in the middle of nowhere, the nearest people being at the very closest 10 miles away, so you're pretty much on your own. Our first night out there, we arrived around 2 a.m., and there was no moon, and it was pitch black, so we had a hard time finding our hogan, a traditional octagon-shaped Navajo house. We decided to just camp near a cattle corral, which we found. We set up tents and knocked out until the sun came up. When I woke up, I took a little walk around our campsite and found coyote tracks which encircled our camp and actually got pretty close to the tents and campfire, which was pretty weird and a bad sign for several reasons. The rest of the day went without incident. We woke up, cooked breakfast, explored the rim of the Grand Canyon on the reservation side, and checked out old hogans in the area. We stayed up partially late that night. We had been out exploring at night and four-wheeling off some road trails. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. We were driving up a rocky road that went up to a small canyon, so there was hills pretty high and steep on both sides of me. I was standing in the back of the truck with a spotlight. That was when I saw the first light. The best way to describe what I saw was the visual effect of when you're standing in a room and someone behind you takes a picture with a flash. There was a brief instant in which everything lit up behind me, but it was a dull orange reddish light. I turned around towards where it came from and shined the light around, but there was nothing there whatsoever. Just a bunch of rocks. We thought it was weird, but kept driving. Once on top of the hill, we stopped to look around and noticed the weird light again, but this time it was far away, at least several miles. It was the same color, but looked like a muzzle flash from a gun. I waited and waited to hear the gunshot, thinking it was people like us shooting at night. But it never came. Then we saw another flash, but this time it was several miles west, and a bit closer. Then another closer and closer, within a few minutes. We decided it was a little weird without talking about it, turned around and went to the hogan this time. We didn't really talk about the lights for some reason, and we all settled down in the hogan. There was myself, my cousin, and my 2 white friends. We talked for a while, and it was at that moment when everyone stops talking and everyone is just about to fall asleep when this happened. The door. There's only one door, a small wooden door which locks shut, shook violently as someone kicked the door as hard as they could. It was loud and strong enough to where you could hear the lock rattle and the door bounce back and rattle against the wooden frame. My friend shot up and said, "What the hell was that?" They had good reason to be alarmed. We were very far from anyone else, and they knew that. It's extremely quiet out here, pretty much deafening silence, and you can hear when vehicles are approaching. I got out of bed, grabbed a shotgun, and told my cousin to get his rifle. I walked to the door, motioned for him to come over, and said, "You get left, I'll go right." I'm not really sure why, but I wasn't scared despite the obvious weirdness of what was going on. I ripped the door open, and we both slipped out the door after one another and swept the area. Looked everywhere we could, and went to the truck and got the spotlight and swept the area. Nothing. No footprints, no animals, nothing. We decided to send a message and shot some rounds off to scare whatever it was anyway. I think we were all kind of worried, but eventually went back to the hogan and settled back in, kind of joking about it to calm our nerves. Eventually, we all fell asleep, but I hid my nervousness, and my heart was still racing. It wasn't until everyone was quiet and asleep that I noticed a thumping. I heard it very faintly through the rock walls, and when I put my ear up to the wall, I heard it a lot better. It was a very rhythmic thumping sound, something very heavy, and timed the same every single thump. It sounded as if it was coming through the rock table that the hogan sits on top of. I tried to rationalize it and told myself it was just the cows, and somehow managed to fall asleep. I woke up the next morning and we went to check the cows, which were about 10 miles away on the ranch and hadn't been anywhere near our hogan last night. Several days later, I told my aunts about what happened. They told me that one of my Navajo grandparents who lived alone and out in the middle of nowhere had weird things happen too. The same night we had our door kicked, someone had knocked on her door in the middle of the night. When she opened the door, there was no one there. My aunts think it was a skinwalker who was messing with me and my cousins because we're mixed. I had a lot of weird stuff happen when I was working there as an EMT as well. It was around 2008 in northern Arizona on a Navajo reservation just on the border of the Hopi reservation, which oddly enough is inside the Navajo reservation. I was working as an EMT for the tribe and had just gotten my medical license a few weeks ago, and it was on one of my first shift where I wasn't third hand on the ambulance with 2 other EMTs. I was working night shift on a spring night. It was a little chilly, but not cold enough to need a jacket. The moon wasn't really out, so it was another dark night on the res. We were stationed outside the emergency department, working from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and responding to 911 calls. We got paged out for a man-down call to the Hopi village with no other information. We usually asked assistance from the police department in securing the scene just because that's standard protocol. And a lot of times it's a nightmare call. There's a possibility of domestic violence or rowdy people. But as there's very few police present on the reservation, there were no police units available to respond with us. We were on our own. We responded code 2, lights but no sirens, and made our way to the village, which was only 10 minutes away. We arrived on scene and immediately saw the patient lying on the ground in the dirt in front of the house. It actually turned out to be a distant relative of mine somehow. I had never met or known him, but I think he was my cousin's distant uncle. He was breathing, but drunk and unconscious. He looked as though someone had either kicked him or stomped on his chest. Nothing required us to load and go, but we would transport him to the hospital to sober up and just to be safe. We checked in his house, found some drunks. Might have been the people who assaulted him, and kicked them out. Now it was partially dark, and in the Hopi village, in that section, there were no streetlights. The only lights we had were the big lights on the side of our ambulance, which cast a big circle of light around the unit. There weren't any porch lights either, so it was pretty dark aside from the ambulance area. What I first noticed was quite weird. A few residents came out of their houses, which was odd because it was 2 a.m. But this village is small, so I didn't think much of it. It was pretty eerie though, because they all stayed just on the outside of the line which the light made. I could tell that they were just neighbors, but they seemed reluctant to walk into the light. At first we arrived, there were lots of dogs barking, and all of the normal noises, birds, cars, bugs, etc. We were outside by the patient, just about to get him onto the stretcher when everything changed. Out of nowhere, there was an incredibly loud howling, which pretty much sounded like a werewolf in a movie. It lasted for a good 15 seconds, long enough to make us freeze and look at each other. It sounded almost exactly like a wolf, but was odd because it sounded like a person doing a wolf call. But it was way too loud to be done by a person unless they were standing right next to us. You could actually feel the reverberate through your body. I had lived there for about a year at this point, so I wasn't super new, but knew enough to where I looked at my partner with a "is this normal?" look. Somehow he knew I was asking without verbalizing it. and shrugged while looking around nervously. I looked back around and all the people were gone in an instant. There was no one around whatsoever. You wouldn't have known that they were even there. Even the people we kicked out of the house were nowhere to be seen, and all of the normal noises were gone. All of the dogs immediately stopped barking, which usually doesn't happen. If anything, the opposite usually happens when there's a noise. Dogs go crazy. We took the sign of everyone getting out of there as a cue to get out. My partner said, "Let's get the hell out of here," and we loaded the patient and were driving out of the village, probably the fastest I've ever seen a non-crucial patient get transported. It wasn't until years later I moved away. I saw the Navajo Cops episode of The Howler, but I found it pretty interesting, considering the area that the episode was pretty far from where we were. Edit. I don't know if that was a skinwalker, or really what it was. Take it as you will. My father told me a story once. I'll never forget it, for a few reasons. I think it's the first story he ever told me as a child. It's also the story of how my grandfather died, but honestly, that isn't the reason. You hear stories on TV, or sometimes you overhear something in a public place. People talk about ghosts, aliens, and you think to yourself, that isn't real. They're making it up, or they're mistaken, or they're crazy, or something like that. You just can't believe it until something happens. Something that brings it all together, connects the dots in a way you didn't think of before. Maybe it happens to you. Maybe you hear it. Maybe you hear the same story again and again, happening to different people. It doesn't take long for the world to become a lot bigger than you thought it was. As I said, this is a story my father told me, but I never believed it, even though he swore up and down it was true. It wasn't until I started clicking around the internet I started to believe. I started to hear other stories, just like the one my father told me. It didn't take me long to believe in the rake. That's not what my father called it, of course. He's never used the internet in his life. He wouldn't know of what the consensus has taken to naming it. When he chose to call it something other than it or that thing, he called it Skinwalker, after an old Cherokee tale his grandfather told him. But I'll tell you the story the way he told it to me. We were out hunting one night, he'd tell me. Coyotes. We'd kill them for $50 a skin. They lived in a dairy farm in Ohio. They'd kill calves sometimes. We'd do it every night because we needed the money. Sometimes, while we were out, we'd come across a deer and kill it. Our landlord didn't mind, and it could feed our family for a few nights and save us some money. Anyway, we were done making our rounds and began heading home, walking, because we didn't have a car or some four-wheeler back then. We'd cut through the woods. That's when we came upon it. Blood everywhere, splattered on the trees, in the grass, in the creek, everywhere. At first, we figured it was a pack of coyotes. We'd seen it sometimes. They can't scavenge and start hunting a deer or cattle. The worst was when they bred with feral dogs. But this wasn't like that. See, when a pack of dogs, or wolves, or coyotes attack something, they do it right. They pick off the one that's weak, or sick, or old, or just small. They hunt it, draw it into a corner, someplace it can't get out of, and they'll run it right into the biggest one, the alpha. And that deer will never see the alpha. It might hear it, but it won't see it. It'll just notice that its throat's gone, and then it'll drop dead. It's quick and clean. That wasn't what happened here. Something had ran up on a den of deer. Coyotes won't attack a den, wolves neither, because they'd get too much of a fight. There were three, I think, 3 bodies. just torn apart. You'd see a head there, a leg there, a torso here. Predators don't do that. They don't leave behind scraps. What had done this hadn't done it for food. It had done it for fun. But we didn't know that. We saw a bunch of carcasses, and we think it's something we gotta take care of. I remember my dad telling me to go home. He thought it was a pack of feral dogs. But I wasn't leaving him, and I damn sure wasn't walking through 2 miles of woods alone, with nothing but a .22 and a pocket knife. He was 13 at the time, so a .22 rifle was the only gun he could reliably use. Dad had a shotgun, and I wasn't going anywhere without it. It took me a while to convince him, but finally we began tracking whatever did that. It wasn't hard either. We just followed the blood. Either that thing bled before it got away, or it dragged one for a mile. I don't know. I know I'd never seen my dad scared before that night. We started hearing noises. I've been in a lot of woods in my life. I've been all over the world, and I haven't ever heard noises like I heard that night. I heard things screaming. Heard deer, a fox, and rabbits, and a raccoon, and birds, just scared. Keep in mind, this is maybe 12 or 1 o'clock. Except the fox and some birds, nothing was supposed to be even awake. But they aren't just awake, they were moving. I saw flocks of birds, just trying to get out of there. We came up on a pack of coyotes, nearly shot a couple of them, thinking it was what we were looking for. But then we saw they were running towards us, then right past us. Didn't even notice. Then some deer did the same. Then some rabbits, squirrels, foxes, and even a couple wild hogs. These things were supposed to be eating each other, and the only thing they cared about was getting out of there. We should have put it together that maybe whatever we were tracking, it wasn't something we were supposed to see, and wasn't something we could kill. I don't know why we didn't just go home. I guess we were curious. I think that was my dad's nature, to go toward trouble, to fight. And knowing what I knew about what my father did during the war, my nature was to stay close to him. We finally get into an open valley. It was normally a soy field, but it wasn't in season, so it was just flat dirt. We saw the tracks. A lot of the animals fleeing the forest had paved over the land. But where that deer blood was, nothing had taken a single step, like they were leaving it for us to find. The tracks were shallow. Whatever it was couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. But that didn't mean much. A bobcat weighing 40 pounds nearly tore out my damn throat once. All that means is it's quick and hard to hit. So we follow the tracks, and it doesn't take us long to find where it is. There's this old schoolhouse that sits on the top of the hill. Half of it had been ripped out by a tornado, but nobody lived there, not for a long time. We caught homeless people in there sometimes, or even druggies looking for a safe place to shoot up. We figured maybe that was it. Maybe it was some sick kid riding a high, but we didn't think that for long. We'd get within 50 yards, and we'd hear this noise, a scratching kind of sound. It was sort of made up of 2 different sounds. One was a high-pitched screech. Another was a low-pitched growl. It was making both at the same time. We get within 20 yards, and we hear the sound. I can remember thinking it sounded like paper being torn apart, while someone was swishing water in a bucket back and forth. My dad looks at me, kneels down and whispers, "I gotta stay behind him, because we're about to corner him. Any animal will fight when it's cornered, especially if it's a predator. But we can tell by the tracks that it's just one. He tells me it's probably a single feral dog, most likely rabid. The plan is to sneak up on it while it's eating, shoot it, and then keep shooting it till it didn't move anymore, then slit its throat. And if it gets to Dad, it's my job to shoot it or stab it to get it off of him. So he walks up, and I'm right behind him, just a tad to his side, so I can see what it is. I wish to this day that I hadn't. It was leaning over a carcass, tearing off its flesh, and throws what it doesn't nibble aside. There was blood all over the brick, glistening in the moonlight. It's pale white, human-looking, but not quite human. It had arms and legs like a human, but it sat like a monkey, hunched over, and its hands weren't normal. It had long fingers with claws at the end. So we see that, and my dad hesitates. He wasn't about to fire on a person, so he clears his throat, trying to get it to turn around. I swear to God, all the noise just ceased. I haven't ever heard true silence before that, and not after it. But for 2 seconds, nothing. Nothing made any noise, which made it all the louder when it turned around and made this shrill cry and jumped on my dad. He got a shot off. I think he missed. If he hit the thing, it didn't mind. But it was on him, tears parts of him off. I start shooting with my .22 point blank, but it barely bled. I got off 5 rounds, and then I started hitting it with the butt of the gun. It wasn't budging. It didn't even register that I was there. It's clawing at my dad, taking off bits of his flesh, and starts on his torso, ripping off skin, and then moves up. It tore off his throat, and then his nose, ripped off the bottom half of his jaw. I don't exactly remember what happened, but somehow my dad's knife ends up in the thing's shoulder, and my dad ends up on my back. I'm running, and by God I'm running faster than I have ever ran before, and it's following me. I end up back in the woods, opposite the ones we've been in. I'm heading towards my landlord's house, 'cause it's half a mile away. I can hear the thing screeching and moaning. I hear these tree branches crack and get thrown around. It sounds like someone's taking an axe to every single tree I pass. It's cracking so loud and often, but I just can't look back. Finally, I trip into gravel. I look up, and there's my landlord and a bunch of his buddies, drinking around a campfire. I scream and I cry, and they come over. I'm telling them to call an ambulance. And he looks at me, and I'll never forget what he said. "What's on your back?" he asked me. Just as he said it, he saw one of those god-awful flannel shirts my dad wore everywhere. It was what was left of my dad. Suddenly we hear it, screeching. He grabs me and my dad gets thrown to the ground. I'm fighting him, crying, 'cause I think we can still save him somehow. But my dad had been gone before I ever picked him up. He has to pick me up and throw me aside before I come with him. He and his buddies were all inside and locking their doors and getting guns. The landlord's asking me what happened, but I just don't know what to tell him. He pieced enough of it all together to understand that there was something dangerous there. All the lights in the house were on, and someone called the cops. They'll be there, but in 15 minutes. We look outside, and I see it walk in front of the fire they'd made. They don't know what it is. One of them says it looks like an ape. Suddenly, something goes through the window. We shoot at it, but it ain't the thing. It's my landlord's dog. Just the body, though, not its head or legs. We start pushing things in front of the doors and windows when we hear something in the garage. I remember one of my friends saying the doors were open. We hear metal and glass just get ripped apart, but we put a couch and TV in front of the door to the garage. It banged around some more, but then it got quiet. Not silent, like it was before. We could hear it move around some, and the guys were talking, making sure the guns were ready. Someone hands me a pistol. No sooner did I cock the hammer back, did we hear something shatter upstairs. Then we heard it screech again, except now it was louder, and it didn't echo and fade out, because it was inside. We all rushed to the one door leading upstairs, and we got to it just as that thing did. It opened it just a bit, and 4 or 5 men just slammed into it. It got its hand through, though. Someone with a shotgun took care of that, put the barrel right up to its wrist, and pulled the trigger. cut its hand clean off. That only pissed it off, though. It started pushing on the door, clawing. We were on one side pushing as best as we could, and it was on the other side doing the same. The wood was just not going to hold. Someone tells us to keep our heads down. Then suddenly, the top half of the door is just gone. My ears ringing, and there were splinters everywhere. 2 or 3 of them unloaded on the top of the door. I don't really know where it went after that. The police got there. I was still glued to the door, or what was left of it. The sun was up before they got me off it. They put me in the hospital for a while. A lot of the people talked to me, but I didn't talk back. Not for a long time. When I got back home, I got a job for the landlord, working on the farm. We didn't talk much, not about the thing, but I signed up for the army when I was 19, and he'd sat me down to drink some scotch as a send-off. I asked him right away what the police told him. The story they went with was a wild animal, probably a wolf or maybe a bear that had migrated north. I asked him how could they say that when they had the hand. He looks at me stunned. He tells me the hand never made it back to the station. The cop who had it in his car wrecked into a tree and died on impact. The hand was never found, probably taken away by an animal. The cops, when they would acknowledge the hand existed at all, said it simply was the paw of a bear and it looked like a human hand. I never talked to the landlord again. He went missing when I was in basic. Never found him. They say he owed some people money and just ran away, but I don't think it's that simple. I never went back to those woods. I wouldn't even if I had the whole U.S. Army on my back. I don't think my father felt he had anything left, and that he might as well settle old scores. He went into those woods. He never came back. The FBI was called. They did a show for everyone involved, but I knew they weren't really looking. I had to get one drunk and slip him a few 50s before he finally told me that they got a few calls about those woods every year, about someone up and vanishing. But that was all he wanted to tell me. Before he got up and left with the rest of the team, he wrote, "The Rake," onto a napkin. I didn't know what it meant until I searched for it on the internet. Honestly, I would have rather not known. Rewind 2 weeks. It's the 4th of July. A few of my friends want to actually do something instead of lounge around in front of our computers like we do every day. There were 5 of us. Me, Neil, Elijah, JD, and Neil's sister, Katie. Neil had the idea to go to his grandparents' house, as they owned a farmhouse. We live in Texas, so having that much space, especially with other houses being half a mile out, it was the perfect place to pop fireworks without getting into too much trouble. The drive from where we lived to their house was about a 40-mile drive. Unfortunately, the only car that we had at our hands was a 2-door, so trying to fit 5 of us into the car was hectic, to say the least. The drive was actually tolerable. 3 of my friends were in the back and found a comfortable, yet funny position to sit in the car. The music Katie was playing was helping a lot and definitely passed the time. We all bought some fireworks halfway there, and my friends jumped back into their designated position for another 20 miles. As we got there, Neil forgot to mention that his grandparents were out of town for the week, which made the experience ahead of us a lot better. All of us got out of the car except for Katie, who suggested that she get us all food and sodas for the night. She kept the fireworks in the back because she didn't want us popping any off while she was gone. She drove off and we were all left there without fireworks. So we did the next best thing, went to the pool in the back. Something that already put me off was that ranch sat considerably close to a forest. Neil even went the extra step to tell me that there's an occasional wolf that can be a hassle to deal with. Of course, I got nervous because I had nothing to defend myself with if one had jumped over the fence. He handed me a pocket knife, saying that there's a shotgun in the living room if something goes down. He mentioned that he was going to set up a game of Risk for us all to play while Katie was out, as the drive to the closest market was well over a couple miles out. So, Elijah and I sat poolside, telling stories to each other about stupid stuff that happened while we were in college. During our talk, I was staring out in the forest line, paranoid about the wolves that Neil teased me about. I saw something move. I couldn't tell since the porch light behind me was making it harder to see any details, but the way it moved made my heart jump. Elijah could see my body language as he leaned in to see what was there. He started to ask me what I saw, and I replied with a wolf on the tree line. He looked toward where I pointed, and he calmed down. "That's just Katie, dude. I think she was trying to scare us." He started calling her name, waving his arm and laughing, saying how she scared the hell out of me. Neil came out of the house, wondering what Elijah was screaming about. Then he saw his sister standing in the field. He started to laugh when Elijah told him what happened and how I was on the edge of my seat. JD came out of the house next, and Neil told him to help Katie with the bags and grab the fireworks. Katie, who was out in the field, started to wave back, but the wave definitely seemed out of place. It wasn't so much waving, but a sudden jerk, like if you were trying to pop your elbow. Elijah yelled for Katie to come back so we can start the party, but JD came back with a terrified look on his face. "Katie's not back yet. I just called her. She's still on the road towards Walmart." Their laughing stopped, and Elijah's face faded, and his arm fell into his lap with a thud. Everyone looked at the still jerking figure in the field. Then she screamed. The scream was so loud, it sounded like it may as well have been a couple feet away. All of us scrambled, running back into the house. Slamming the door behind us, Neil shouted for us to lock the doors and grab the shotgun in the living room. I ran to grab the shotgun, as it was the closest thing to us, while the other two ran to each of the doors leading inside. Quickly, I grabbed the shotgun and stuffed a couple of shells in my pocket, running back to the kitchen, where we came in from, and handed the shotgun to Neil. I pulled out the shells and sat them on the counter, and he loaded one in. JD came back nearly covered in sweat, freaking out, and shouted, "What the fuck was that?" Just as scared as he was, I look at both of them. Elijah quickly joining us again. "You don't think it was a skinwalker? I read stories. I've been all over 4chan and creepypastas." JD tried to reassure us. "No, it can't be. That's Katie. I'm sure she's just trying to scare us." "Cut the bullshit, JD," Neil barked at him. "That scream wasn't human. You already called her, and you told us she was still going out." He turned back to the door, pushing the blinds slightly, to find Katie closer to us. It stood at the gates of the pool, illuminated by the light, and revealing that didn't look much like Katie at all. The hair was a mess, and the clothes looked tattered. Her skin was bruised. The one thing that caught our eye most was her face. The head was tilted, like it struggled to support the weight. The eyes were blank with emotion, and the jaw was agape. It raised an arm, jerking it like it did before in a mock wave. The jerking, however, started to get more violent as the entire body started to shake uncontrollably. Neil quickly closed the curtains and backed off. He orders us to sit behind the counter. He set himself in the gap leading into the kitchen with a gun aimed at the door. I was silent for what felt like an hour. The three of us continued to look at Neil, who was completely focused on the door. A massive, grotesque smell entered our noses, and all of us reacted appropriately. The horrid stench was like if you left groceries to ferment in a box in the summer heat, with a couple of carcasses as a garnish. It was definitely hard to breathe, tasting the smell in the back of your throat, even with your nose pinched. It was so bad, JD actually threw up. Then, without any warning, the smell was gone. The hot air that was the smell went away, and was easier to breathe. I was afraid to let go of my nose, but was rewarded with a breath of fresh air. Everyone took a couple of breaths to rid their lungs of the pungent smell that lingered before. Neil asked us if we were okay and replied, JD being the exception since he'd puked. We heard what sounded like a whine. It sounded like a mix between a dog and a child about to cry. It was coming from the porch door, but from the front where we came in from the car. All of us stood up, Neil moving forward as we stayed back. We knelt down by the stairs, still hearing this whining. It didn't hit me until we positioned ourselves, but it sounded like something was trying to talk for the first time, like an animal. In a raspy, but still high-pitched voice, I could make out a very small portion of what it was trying to say. Gee, fuck, hot. It kept repeating this, until it started to sound more enunciated, more human. What the fuck was that? It sounded like JD. Same accent, same speech pattern, same voice. JD started to shiver. His breath was getting shallow. He shouted back in a scared voice I'd never heard come from his mouth until now. Get out. Leave us alone. Get the fuck out. Leave us alone. Get out. The last words that we heard were in the same scream we heard when we saw it initially. It started to pound on the door. Not like it was trying to force itself in, but like an impatient knock. It started to scream in the same pitch we heard it when we initially saw it. Get out! Get out! Get out! It terrified all of us. The inhuman screams. The polite pounding on the door. I started crying. I thought this was it. Neil wasn't scared, like us. He was right pissed. He stood up storming towards the door, screaming. He swung open the door, pointing his shotgun at whatever was on the other side, pulling the trigger, filling all of our ears with the sound of a shotgun blast, and the ringing to follow. Neil stood at the door, huffing. His body language was wanting to rip this thing apart. I stood up, looking past his arm, seeing nothing but a shell on the ground. I looked up past his shoulders, seeing nothing on the driveway, and the road leading back to where we came. He turned around, the adrenaline fading away, and a shaky voice coming from his mouth. We're not staying here. JD, call Katie and tell her to get ready to go back home when she comes back. The rest of the time, all of us were in the kitchen. The shotgun sat on the counter with several shells near the butt of the gun. None of us wanted to say anything. None of us wanted to look at each other. It was nothing but silence until Katie called us. Neil quickly wrote a note, leaving it on the gun as we left. All of us hopped into the car, silent. Katie noticed our behavior and constantly edged us to tell her what happened. She pouted and put on her music to cheer us up. The only thing I could hear was the blood-curdling scream, telling us to get out. Number 2. My background. My dad is full-blooded Navajo from northern Arizona, and my mom is white. I grew up in SoCal, but grew up going to the res every year and eventually moved and worked there. I'm not a Skinwalker expert by any means, but I'll share what I know. The first experience I had was on one of my first solo trips without my parents, out to our ranch on the reservation. I went with my cousin and a few friends. Our ranch is pretty much in the middle of nowhere, the nearest people being at the very closest 10 miles away, so you're pretty much on your own. Our first night out there, we arrived around 2 a.m., and there was no moon, and it was pitch black. So we had a hard time finding our hogan, a traditional octagon-shaped Navajo house. We decided to just camp near a cattle corral, which we found. We set up tents and knocked out until the sun came up. When I woke up, I took a little walk around our campsite and found coyote tracks which encircled our camp and actually got pretty close to the tents and campfire, which was pretty weird and a bad sign for several reasons. The rest of the day went without incident. We woke up, cooked breakfast, explored the rim of the Grand Canyon on the reservation side, and checked out old hogans in the area. We stayed up partially late that night. We had been out exploring at night and four-wheeling off some road trails. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. We were driving up a rocky road that went up to a small canyon, so there was hills pretty high and steep on both sides of me. I was standing in the back of the truck with a spotlight. That was when I saw the first light. The best way to describe what I saw was the visual effect of when you're standing in a room and someone behind you takes a picture with a flash. There was a brief instant in which everything lit up behind me, but it was a dull orange reddish light. I turned around towards where it came from and shined the light around, but there was nothing there whatsoever. Just a bunch of rocks. We thought it was weird, but kept driving. Once on top of the hill, we stopped to look around and noticed the weird light again, but this time it was far away, at least several miles. It was the same color, but looked like a muzzle flash from a gun. I waited and waited to hear the gunshot, thinking it was people like us shooting at night. But it never came. Then we saw another flash, but this time it was several miles west, and a bit closer. Then another closer and closer, within a few minutes. We decided it was a little weird without talking about it, turned around and went to the hogan this time. We didn't really talk about the lights for some reason, and we all settled down in the hogan. There was myself, my cousin, and my 2 white friends. We talked for a while, and it was at that moment when everyone stops talking and everyone is just about to fall asleep when this happened. The door. There's only one door, a small wooden door which locks shut, shook violently as someone kicked the door as hard as they could. It was loud and strong enough to where you could hear the lock rattle and the door bounce back and rattle against the wooden frame. My friend shot up and said, "What the hell was that?" They had good reason to be alarmed. We were very far from anyone else, and they knew that. It's extremely quiet out here, pretty much deafening silence, and you can hear when vehicles are approaching. I got out of bed, grabbed a shotgun, and told my cousin to get his rifle. I walked to the door, motioned for him to come over, and said, "You get left, I'll go right." I'm not really sure why, but I wasn't scared despite the obvious weirdness of what was going on. I ripped the door open, and we both slipped out the door after one another and swept the area. Looked everywhere we could, and went to the truck and got the spotlight and swept the area. Nothing. No footprints, no animals, nothing. We decided to send a message and shot some rounds off to scare whatever it was anyway. I think we were all kind of worried, but eventually went back to the hogan and settled back in, kind of joking about it to calm our nerves. Eventually, we all fell asleep, but I hid my nervousness, and my heart was still racing. It wasn't until everyone was quiet and asleep that I noticed a thumping. I heard it very faintly through the rock walls, and when I put my ear up to the wall, I heard it a lot better. It was a very rhythmic thumping sound, something very heavy, and timed the same every single thump. It sounded as if it was coming through the rock table that the hogan sits on top of. I tried to rationalize it and told myself it was just the cows, and somehow managed to fall asleep. I woke up the next morning and we went to check the cows, which were about 10 miles away on the ranch and hadn't been anywhere near our hogan last night. Several days later, I told my aunts about what happened, They told me that one of my Navajo grandparents who lived alone and out in the middle of nowhere had weird things happen too. The same night we had our door kicked, someone had knocked on her door in the middle of the night. When she opened the door, there was no one there. My aunts think it was a skinwalker who was messing with me and my cousins because we're mixed. I had a lot of weird stuff happen when I was working there as an EMT as well. It was around 2008 in northern Arizona on a Navajo reservation just on the border of the Hopi Reservation, which oddly enough is inside the Navajo Reservation. I was working as an EMT for the tribe and had just gotten my medical license a few weeks ago, and it was on one of my first shift where I wasn't third hand on the ambulance with 2 other EMTs. I was working night shift on a spring night. It was a little chilly, but not cold enough to need a jacket. The moon wasn't really out, so it was another dark night on the res. We were stationed outside the emergency department, working from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and responding to 911 calls. We got paged out for a man-down call to the Hopi village with no other information. We usually asked assistance from the police department in securing the scene just because that's standard protocol. And a lot of times it's a nightmare call. There's a possibility of domestic violence or rowdy people. But as there's very few police present on the reservation, there were no police units available to respond with us. We were on our own. We responded code 2, lights but no sirens, and made our way to the village, which was only 10 minutes away. We arrived on scene and immediately saw the patient lying on the ground in the dirt in front of the house. It actually turned out to be a distant relative of mine somehow. I had never met or known him, but I think he was my cousin's distant uncle. He was breathing, but drunk and unconscious. He looked as though someone had either kicked him or stomped on his chest. Nothing required us to load and go, but we would transport him to the hospital to sober up and just to be safe. We checked in his house, found some drunks. Might have been the people who assaulted him, and kicked them out. Now it was partially dark, and in the Hopi village, in that section, there were no streetlights. The only lights we had were the big lights on the side of our ambulance, which cast a big circle of light around the unit. There weren't any porch lights either, so it was pretty dark aside from the ambulance area. What I first noticed was quite weird. A few residents came out of their houses, which was odd because it was 2 a.m. But this village is small, so I didn't think much of it. It was pretty eerie though, because they all stayed just on the outside of the line which the light made. I could tell that they were just neighbors, but they seemed reluctant to walk into the light. At first we arrived, there were lots of dogs barking, and all of the normal noises, birds, cars, bugs, etc. We were outside by the patient, just about to get him onto the stretcher when everything changed. Out of nowhere, there was an incredibly loud howling, which pretty much sounded like a werewolf in a movie. It lasted for a good 15 seconds, long enough to make us freeze and look at each other. It sounded almost exactly like a wolf, but was odd because it sounded like a person doing a wolf call. But it was way too loud to be done by a person unless they were standing right next to us. You could actually feel the reverberate through your body. I had lived there for about a year at this point, so I wasn't super new, but knew enough to where I looked at my partner with a "is this normal?" look. Somehow he knew I was asking without verbalizing it, and shrugged while looking around nervously. I looked back around and all the people were gone in an instant. There was no one around whatsoever. You wouldn't have known that they were even there. Even the people we kicked out of the house were nowhere to be seen, and all of the normal noises were gone. All of the dogs immediately stopped barking, which usually doesn't happen. If anything, the opposite usually happens when there's a noise. Dogs go crazy. We took the sign of everyone getting out of there as a cue to get out. My partner said, "Let's get the hell out of here," and we loaded the patient and were driving out of the village, probably the fastest I've ever seen a non-crucial patient get transported. It wasn't until years later I moved away. I saw the Navajo Cops episode of The Howler, but I found it pretty interesting, considering the area that the episode was pretty far from where we were. Edit. I don't know if that was a skinwalker, or really what it was. Take it as you will. This is the story of my first encounter with an odd creature I grew to call Skinwalker. I didn't start calling them that until I came face to face with one a second time. I am now 17, but when this happened I was 9. At the time, I lived in a very small town in Michigan called Stockbridge. The town lies outside of a semi-thick forest, and I've been told by my dad much of it was cut down. My house was on the outskirts of town, near the woods. There wasn't much to do in the town. There were no fun places to go, and I had no video games or TV. So me and my friend Jake would spend all of our time outside. Both our parents were comfortable with us being outside without supervision and let us do what we wanted. The day this story takes place was August or September, and was already dusk. My dad agreed that Jake and I could take his dog for a walk in the woods, as long as we didn't stay out too long. We had been walking a path which led to a creek and had been planning to turn back once we reached it. It was about 15 minutes away from the edge of the woods. We were 10 minutes into the walk and Jake's dog, Midnight, had begun sniffing everything in sight. He was a well-trained dog most of the time. We could walk with him through the woods without a leash. But before the walk, we had gotten him really excited and he still hadn't calmed down completely. A small animal saw Midnight and quickly ran back the way it came. Midnight, still a bit hyper, bolted after it, ignoring Jake's cries for it to come back. Jake and I ran after Midnight as fast as we could, but we soon lost the sight of him, and had only the noise of his barks to follow. The case lasted a few minutes until we caught up to Midnight. He had stopped to sniff at a tree. We took a few moments to catch our breaths before we turned to follow the path we had made, crushing through the underbrush. Midnight was now walking happily beside us. We hadn't gone very far when Midnight stopped, sniffing the air. Once again, he had turned and ran into the foliage. This time, he wasn't wagging his tail or barking, just running. Again, we chased him, but he wasn't going that fast and kept slowing down, like he wanted us to follow him. We stopped at a small hill that overlooked a clearing. I remember this part perfectly. Midnight started to quiet growl, and his fur started to rise. I remember being confused, but I couldn't see anything. The noise of something moving reached my ears. As I looked in the direction of the noise, a deer crawled into the clearing. This deer crawled, not limped or walked, it crawled like a child. I remember being transfixed on the deer. I saw it had no tail, and its face and body was oddly human. Its eyes were a bit too wide, and its nose was a bit too short and pointed, and its ears were too circular. At one point, it got so close, I could see that around the pupils of its eyes were white. This is not normal for a deer. None of us made a sound, not even Midnight, as it walked around the clearing. It must have seen us, but I guess it didn't give a damn, as long as we didn't disturb it. After walking around the clearing 3 times, it walked closer toward the middle. It slowly raised itself to be standing on all 4 legs. Once it did that, it stretched its front legs out for a few moments, like a cat. Once done stretching, it raised its front legs, kind of like a horse can. Unlike a horse, it raised until its back was straight and its arms fell to its side. Midnight started barking like someone was trying to kill him. He sounded angry and dangerous. This was not the first or last time I heard Midnight bark like that, and it didn't even cause me to look at him. Instead, I continued staring at the deer, who was now staring back at us. Its eyes were wider than they had been, and it froze like a deer caught in the headlight of a car. After an unknown amount of time of midnight's barking and the deer's staring, the deer turned and started to run on two legs through the woods. It ran like a man, arms swinging slightly up and down like a person can do. It was faster than anything I had ever seen, faster than any deer once it heard a gunshot. Minutes passed and we all just stood there, staring at the area where it ran. Soon, Jake turned to Midnight, who was now relaxed, and told him to walk with us. I remember leaving the clearing, but for the life of me I can't remember how we found the trail or exited the woods. Both of our parents were terribly angry with us. We had been in the woods for almost an hour, and by the time we got back, it was really dark out. We both told them what happened in the woods, but they said the deer must have been injured or something. Even at us insisting that the deer stood up, they told us it was just our imaginations, and that there was nothing to worry about. Jake and I talked about a lot after that. We also talked about my second encounter when it happened. Sadly, I moved and lost contact with Jake. This is my second encounter with a skinwalker. This happened when I was 10, and unlike my first encounter, I do not remember much of the fine details such as time, date, or exact location. I do remember that this happened sometime in winter 2011 and took place in Canada. This happened when I was 10. I didn't know that skinwalkers were a thing at this point in time, and so my idea of skinwalkers and yours may be extremely different. My dad was thinking it would be cool, suggesting that the entire family take a trip up to Canada to visit his brother, my uncle. My mom shot that shit down immediately, as it was in the middle of winter and very cold. My dad, who can talk anyone into anything, anyone but my mom, got her to agree with him. After my dad talked some more, he was able to take only one child with him. He could take the eldest child, a boy of 10, me. My mom wouldn't agree to anything else. A week went by, in which I assume my dad got everything sorted out with James, my uncle. My dad and I loaded into the car with our suitcases and started the multi-hour drive to our destination. This was my first time out of the country, and so I spent most of my time staring out the window. Before I knew it, we were stopping safely at our destination. We must have crossed through a border check at some point, but I don't remember it. Our destination turned out to be a cabin in the middle of the woods, with no civilization for miles. It was fantastic. This remains the only time I visited Canada, but the woods were beautiful. I remember being awestruck by them. The trees were a different type than in Michigan. The nature was loud with animals, and there were some bird calls I couldn't place. And the snow was deep, but seemingly untouched. I met James and his family for the first time. The first 3 or 4 days were a blast, exploring my new surroundings and just having fun with others. My family isn't big on guns. Up until this point, I had never even seen one. My dad hesitantly said yes, believing his brother and his promise that he wouldn't actually let me shoot it. James got his gun, which was some kind of rifle, I believe, and we went into the woods. I followed him as we walked, wondering what the gun would sound like. We hadn't gone far before we reached a fence that had cans on top of it. James showed me all the parts of the gun, even unloading it, so I could hold it. He showed me how to shoot, and I had a good time, even though I actually wasn't shooting at the cans. An hour went by, and it started to snow. At this point, James and I were cold, so we decided to start heading back. I don't know how close we were to the cabin when I saw it. Over some brush, I saw what I thought was a deer standing on its hind legs, walking like James and I were a moment before. I went running towards it, all of my memories of the previous year's running deer flooding through my head. Running deer was what Jake and I started calling it, thinking that it was a name that fit the creature well. James saw me running and must have seen what I was running towards. It was massive, bigger than a deer by at least 1.5 feet. He quickly caught up with me and put his hand in front of me to stop me from going any closer. We just watched it for a bit. At first it had its back turned to us, and I could see it didn't have a tail. After a few moments, it noticed us and turned around. Its face was unlike the deer's. Ears too round, nose too short and pointed, and its eyes too wide. Again, I could see the whites of its eyes. Other than that, the face was completely different from the deer's. For one, it was a moose, not a deer. Those two animals don't look much alike. For another, it looked surprised. The deer had seen us, but no emotion at all ever crossed its face. Not even when midnight had started barking. But the moose looked shocked. It looked like it had found an unknown creature. I watched the moose with curiosity and wonder. The moose looked at us with something in its eyes. I couldn't place it at the time. Years later, I was 12. I saw the same look in another creature's eye. The creature was a starving dog, guarding its kill from me as I walked by. That look was hunger. The moose started walking toward us. It didn't get 3 steps before I heard a gunshot. Immediately after the gun was fired, the tree directly behind the moose seemingly exploded. Without a moment's hesitation, the moose turned and ran, faster than anything that size should be able to move. I didn't watch it as it ran. I had fallen over, ears ringing. I had been wearing earmuffs while James was shooting earlier, but I had taken them off while we were walking back. The ringing gave way to a splitting headache. I have never been so close to a gun when it fired. I have heard that being close to a gun when fired can leave you close to death for a while, but the ringing seemed to wear off after a few minutes. James was in front of me when he shot. Maybe that had something to do with it. Anyway, once it was evident that my hearing was back, James made me promise not to tell anyone anything that just happened. Me being 10, I told my dad. James and I saw a moose, and it was standing just like a man, just like the deer. As soon as I got back, James was standing right behind me and everything. I remember James saying something like, "This kid's got one hell of an imagination," and my dad just started laughing. I have tried talking to James about this. I tried just before writing this, in fact, but he always seems to avoid the subject. He even went as far as to hang up on me when I tried pushing for information earlier. This is my 3rd story. At the time, I was 16 and lived in Massachusetts. I've also lived in Michigan and Wisconsin and have had encounters in both. I live near Boston, but was going on a road trip with my friend and his family out to their new place in the remote parts of Massachusetts. I'll call my friend Chad. We got to their house and I was planning to stay for about a week to help them get settled in and to see the surrounding area. At the edge of their property, they have these woods, which start off with just a few trees here and there, but after a 5-minute walk, it gets really dense. On the 3rd day of being there, Chad's mom says she wants to give me and Chad a day off, so we could do whatever we wanted. At first, we wandered around the property and hung around the house. Then we choose to walk to the closest town. This takes 30 minutes. The town is small and there isn't much to do, but I'm happy just to be back in a place like I lived for most of my life. Small and in the middle of nowhere. We talked to an owner of an ice cream shop, which told us a bit of history about the town, nothing important or exciting. After that, we had started back to Chad's house. We got back around noon, and I suggested we go for a walk in the woods. Chad, who isn't the outdoorsy type, said no, but after a couple minutes of me nagging him, he agreed to go. Even though I go out all the time, I camp and walk the trails at night most of the time. I have gotten paranoid due to skinwalkers and other stuff, so I always have a pocket knife with me when I go out like this. So I ran inside the house to get it. We started into the woods, leaving an obvious trail. Like I said, the woods were very thick. At first, Chad spends his time grumbling things like, "There's too many bugs. It's too damn warm outside to be doing things." Keep in mind, this was the last month in October. After a while, he started to enjoy being outside, and he actually says he liked it, and wanted to go further into the woods. By now, it was 4:30, and it was rapidly getting dark, but I didn't really care that much. We kept walking into the dark, to the point where I couldn't see much. We had started on our way back, but at some point we had gotten separated. I noticed this and turned on the flashlight on my phone, spinning around to see if I could see Chad. I couldn't. "Chad!" I yelled out. "Can you hear me? If you can, say something." I waited, and a few moments later, off to my right, I heard a feeble stammer. "Zach." Zach is my name. It sounded like Chad, and I quickly turned to the direction of the noise and slowly walked towards it. I didn't see anything, so I moved my light horizontally to try to spot anything. I called out again, "Chad!" and got "Zach" again. It was much stronger and louder this time. I walked forward with more confidence but stopped dead in my tracks as I heard something big move very quickly through the bush right behind me. I whipped around frantically and came face to face with Chad. At first I was stunned. I had heard him from the opposite direction. Up to this point in my life, I had only encountered a skinwalker with another person once, and we were together when it happened. So this situation was new to me. What the hell were you doing behind me? Why didn't you come from the same direction as your voice?" I practically yelled at him, overcome by anger at being tricked like that. "What are you talking about? You were the one changing directions," Chad yelled back. "What?" I said quietly. I shined my light on him. I could see he was obviously shaken. "I heard you call my name and I started to walk toward you. You sounded scared or hurt at first, but after a few minutes you started saying my name normally. Then you stopped answering my calls and I heard you from behind me, and I saw your light, so I started running at you," he explained. I was scared, finally putting the pieces together. I had never encountered a skinwalker that could impersonate a person's voice before, and I realized it was in the woods with us. There was a faint noise of movement behind me. I turned around to see a horrible sight. Not 10 feet in front of me, its head looked like a wolf's, like the kind you would see at a zoo. It was at least 6.5 feet tall. Its head, shoulders, and arms and chest were all covered in thick gray and white fur. Its legs and most of its stomach held a much thinner pelt of the same fur. Both Chad and I saw the creature and ran faster than I thought we could. For whatever reason, the creature didn't chase us, and we made it out of the woods without incident. Chad told his family, who didn't believe him. I didn't tell mine because they haven't believed me about this stuff in the past. Chad has not gone back to the woods and has not seen the beast again. I haven't thought about this in a good 10 years since it happened. I'll start at the beginning. My family moved to secluded Pennsylvania when I was 4. I was immediately entranced with living in the country, with several acres of woods behind us, and the house seemed so huge to me at the time. However, as a kid, I was always sensitive to spirits or energy, and there were definitely some creepy things going on in the house. So my parents noticed that I stayed with our dog Bambi a lot. He was a small sheepdog and my adventure buddy when we went walking in the woods. In case you're questioning my parents, they trusted me, as young as age 7, to walk around alone as long as I was with my dog. As he was very protective of me, my dad would give me his cell phone to carry with me just in case I needed any help. Up until I was 15, I spent a lot of time alone by choice. After school, I'd be home by 3:20. I'd eat lunch immediately and take Bambi out into the woods, and we'd explore the surrounding forests, fields, meadows, and ponds together. He was always right by my side and seemed really attuned to the spirit. If I felt something was in the house, he'd bark at it or whine, or I'd watch him follow it around. Usually, he picked up on the presence of something at the same time I would. Anyway, from the backyard to the left, there is a small strip of trees, and in the fall and winter, when the branches are bare, you can see the field next door, which is about 300 yards from my house itself. There is a big plane shed up there, and a kind of runway, where my neighbor would fly his biplanes off. What's kind of important to the story is we have no neighbors for a mile in every direction. It's pretty rare to see any kind of people on the surrounding properties unless it's my neighbor haying the fields in the summer. But one day, in early fall, I had been trumping through the woods with Bambi for several hours, and I let him run off the leash most of the time because he would run ahead about 20 feet and keep turning around to check if I was still there. If I had lost sight of him, he'd retrace his steps to find me again. That day, I got caught up in something, so Bambi ran off a little bit and I suddenly realized I was alone. Suddenly, there was a lot of crashing deeper in the woods, and I heard Bambi's alarm bark and a lot of yelping and then some screeching. Raccoons and gophers really make fucking scary distress sounds, so I figured that's what it was. So I called Bambi, and he popped out of some brush, covered in pickers, and since I was spooked, I ran right back home with him. Right as I got back to the door, I stopped to catch my breath, and Bambi and I were just standing there when I spotted something standing on the very edge of the runway. It ran along the higher end of the field, and then there was a steep drop off the edge of the hill at the very end of it. They didn't appear to be wearing anything distinctive, but even at dusk, I could see that they were appearing completely black, or everything about them was very shadowy and dark. This part gives me shivers now. They were standing, facing off the runway, and then I saw them hunch over and slowly raise their head and yell, "Bambi!" at the same high voice I would use to call him. They had the same vocal inflection as me too, but it sounded like they were trying really hard to sound like me. Next to me, Bambi tucked his tail under, lowered his head, and growled softly. They called again, but this time it sounded like they were losing their voice, as if they had been calling it for a while. My 8-year-old logic assumed that someone was trying to steal my dog, but why would they stand in the middle of the field and be so obvious about it? When I told my parents about it that night, they dismissed my story. The next day, I went to my cousin's house 2 miles up the road, and my uncle told me about an animal he saw the night before that he was trying to identify. He said it looked like an emaciated cow sprinting across the bridge over the creek, which was about 300 yards from the runway. And also since then, anyone who's been at my house has always been uneasy around the creek and the plain shed runway, whether or not they're interested at all in the paranormal. I know a lot of death happens in nature, but I've also found goats ripped up in the field. The nearest house with any amount of goats or farm animals is nearly 4 miles away, and a lot of unexplained things have happened up there. Number 2. Background. I'm a female, and this occurred 2 years ago when I was 18. This takes place in Maine. Every summer, my family and I go up to camp in Ellsworth, Maine. It's about a 3-hour drive from my house. The camp itself is an hour from the nearest town. I've been going to this camp my entire life. My family owns it, and I've never had an incident like this happen before. I was watching TV in the middle of the night. Both of my brothers and parents had gone to bed. I had heard a noise coming from the kitchen and realized the dogs needed to go outside to do their business. So I took my brother's 2 pit bulls and my tiny dog outside after turning on the porch light. I walked around the front yard and let the dogs off the leash. It's so incredibly dark in the woods in Maine that the porch light really only illuminated the porch and nothing else. So I tried to keep an eye on them. I was momentarily distracted when I saw a wild bird on the lake. When I looked back, I saw the pit bulls were both looking at something in the woods. I couldn't see what it was, but I assumed they'd seen a squirrel or a raccoon. It was then I realized I didn't see Alfie anywhere. She's an awfully small dog, and she's completely black. I called her a few times, and heard a soft whimpering right where the dogs had been looking earlier. I took a couple steps in that direction and called for her again, worried that she may have gotten her paws stuck between rocks or gotten stuck in a snake hole. Suddenly, I felt something moving behind me. I whipped around and looked down, and it was Alfie. She had been staying close to me the entire time. I just hadn't seen her. So naturally I was thinking, if Alfie's here, what the fuck is in the woods? I took another step forward, and the pit bulls began to growl. They were slowly advancing, and were now on either side of me, looking right into the blackness of the woods. I quickly picked up Alfie and began to back up, very slowly. I'm not sure what I thought was there, but there's a lot of animals in Maine, and I figured the dogs knew better than I did, since I couldn't see anything. Right as I turned around, I heard the most absolutely bone-chilling thing I have ever heard in my life. Coming from the direction of the woods, I heard someone, or something, call Alfie's name. It sounded almost as if it was trying to mimic me, but it was just all wrong. The voice sounded really distorted and almost seemed to wail. I freaked the fuck out and ran inside with the dogs. I have no idea what was out there in the woods. My camp is essentially a log cabin overlooking a lake, and our nearest neighbor, who is also family, lives at least a half a mile in the opposite direction of where that thing was. So, I decided to join my best friend Karen for a 3-day stay at her grandmother's place on the reservation. Her grandmother lives near a place called Tuba City, Arizona, in the middle of nowhere but surrounded by secluded homes. We go to college together, and I was kind of interested to know about Navajo tradition. The first day we stayed, it was pretty chill, nothing out of the ordinary. But then her grandma, not old, around 65, said that a stray dog came out of nowhere and wouldn't leave. To me, it acted kind of strange and ugly looking. Black, shaggy coat, looked like a mix between a German Shepherd and a lab. That night, we were watching a movie in the living room. We had big windows that looked out into the front where the cars were parked, with the curtains wide open. Grandma was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and we were watching a movie. Next to the window is a medium bookshelf and where we keep our DVDs. Karen went to put back a DVD we had just watched, but she freaked out because that stray black dog was staring at us through the window, standing on top of the wood box outside. Not something normal dogs do, from my point of view or hers. Usually, my dog, which is a house dog, scratches the door to be let in. Reservation dogs aren't house dogs, and dogs inside houses are frowned upon in Navajo tradition, meant to protect the house and the owner. The other dogs seemed to stray away from it. Karen opened the door and yelled at it to get off the box. It ran off behind the shed. We went to Tuba City to get some groceries and came back to the house. The dog was nowhere to be seen, nothing unusual. Grandma went to visit some people, so it was just Karen and I. About 5 o'clock, we heard someone trying to open the door. We both looked out, since there had been no car heard and no dogs barking. We looked out the living room window to the door, and there was a dog trying to open the door with its paws. 2 paws wrapped around the brass doorknob, standing on its hind legs. I thought that was weird, but it didn't really freak me out. Karen was, though. She opened the door and chased it off. Grandma came back later, and Karen told her she didn't like what she heard. We got ready to sleep. We slept in the spare room, since it had 2 beds. One of the window curtains opened a little. We turned off the light, but something sounded like it was on top of the roof. Pitter-patter, footsteps and scratching sounds, as well as panting. Weird, because the roof was way up there. It sounded like it jumped off onto a large plastic water barrel that they had. At first, we heard what sounded like barking, but as it grew louder, the dog seemed to be barking at something else. But all of a sudden, something was running around the house, barking, and it was no dog. No, it wasn't. The barking sounded human, a deep male voice barking, like it knew that we knew it wasn't a dog. Woof, 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 ruff, ruff, arf, arf, just exactly like that, adding the W's, R's, and A's. Then panting again by the window, and we started freaking out. Karen decided to open the curtains to look out. In my opinion, that was stupid. There was a stray dog on its hind legs looking into our bedroom, but this time it stunk. And what I thought were 2 black holes in the neck. Another pair of eyes twinkled. Think of those ugly, glossy spider eyes staring at you, and the paws were deformed, looking like hands, and overgrown, somewhat thick, sharp fingernails. Again, both screaming and shutting the curtains closed. Grandma came running through the door, and seeing it, first thing she did was grab ashes from the fireplace, loaded 3 bullets into a shotgun from under her bed, blessed herself in Navajo, and went outside to shoot it, yelling in Navajo about how the thing wasn't welcomed here, and how it should get the hell out, and for it to go linger somewhere else. Them both being traditional, the next day they called a medicine man to come over and put cedar in the house. He prayed over everyone with cedar smoke and an eagle feather, blessed the place, and made us eat bitter herbs called eagle's gull or something, and gave me an old arrowhead. Apparently, I needed to carry one for protection, and a little pouch called a corn pullen. Seems to work pretty well. The medicine man said the dog was a skinwalker, which in Navajo is a long word, but I just call them Yoshis. The body of a stray dog, which was killed by the skinwalker, made an illusion, so we wouldn't know that it wasn't a real dog. He also said that skinwalkers tend to harm people by using some sort of human bone, straw, to spit at someone and get human bones into them. Doctors can't detect it, but the medicine man that day pulled a piece of a human skull out of my grandma's right shoulder, pretty big, about 2 inches long and 1 centimeter thick. It was real because we watched him pull it out of her. That was intense. So, I lived in my parents' rental house near my school. It was kind of an intermediate form of living on my own. All the perks, not as many responsibilities. They wanted me to worry about school rather than bills, is how they put it. I still have a part-time job for groceries and other various stuff I want though. The night it happened, I'd come home to a crazy dog, Vinny. My big black lab was going absolutely bonkers. He was jumping up on me, which he never does, and barely let me get to the counter to set down my takeout. I figured he was out of water or excited for dinner. It was close to dinner time, and I paused to scruff him and calm him down. But he just kept bounding around like he wanted to tell me something. I filled his bowl and took my Thai food to the couch. I put on my favorite show and settle in. I had a paper to write, but was putting it off for a while. It was for my American film as a lecture class, which was important for my comparative lecture major, but I wasn't thrilled to write the paper on native son. So it was probably going to be a late night for me, as I was inevitably going to put it off until late. Vinny came bounding in the living room and stood in front of the television. I stared at him for a moment as he panted furiously and started barking at me. I was quick to hush him because he has a big bark and we had neighbors. But he kept stalking around the living room, making various dog noises, whining and pawing at the carpet. I put my book down and went to give him more food just to shut him up. But his bowl was untouched. He never left so much as a kibble behind, and I became very apprehensive. He was acting like something was wrong, and he wasn't a drama queen, so I made sure all of the doors were locked and turned on some lights. "Go outside, Vinny," I said, sitting back on the couch. He whined at me and I had to get up to pull him by the collar to get him to the dog door to the backyard. He shot me a look and climbed through and I sighed, still a bit concerned, but not overly so. I went back to the living room and resumed my dinner. After a good 5 episodes or so, I got enough inspiration to go into the computer room and start writing my paper. There was a thump from outside as I sat down, but I ignored it. Vinny could get crazy sometimes and bounced all over the place, so I directed my attention to my homework and slowly got going. I'd been working for an hour or so when I heard another thump and something drag along the side of the house. I furrowed my brow and tried to concentrate on my paper, but something felt off. Vinny started barking and I rushed to the door to get him to come in. He was growling, hackles fully up, and I could barely get him back inside. I locked the dog door and tried to walk away, but he just sat there, staring at it, still growling. I cautiously grabbed his collar and opened the door. The yard looked normal, kind of sickly in the outdoor lights, but otherwise just fine. Vinny jerked against me, and it took all I had to keep control of him. He started barking again, and I had had enough. We were going inside for the night. I made sure all of the doors were locked and the garage was closed. Something was definitely off, and I decided to finally call the police on the non-emergency number. "Hi, my dog is acting really weird, and I've heard some noises outside. Is there any way you could have someone drive by my house?" I asked. "Of course," the woman said. "What's your address?" I told her my address and thanked her profusely. Vinny was still acting like a nutcase, but I didn't want him to go outside anymore. I felt better with him going crazy inside where he could protect me. Vinny is a big dog, fiercely protective, and really scary when he wants to be. I had a boyfriend try to hit me once and Vinny nearly bit his arm off. He may have been acting like a manic, but if something happened, he'd have my back. I sat back down at the computer and the measly 400 words I'd managed to write and listened to Vinny bark at the door. I was going to go crazy and I had no real way to shut him up. I considered locking him in his crate, but I was too on edge. There was a knock at the door and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Vinny started barking his head off, and I grabbed his collar again so I could open the door. 2 policemen stood on my porch. "We just wanted to let you know everything looks okay from the street," the first said, looking a bit nervous as I held the bouncing, growling beast by my collar. "Did you want us to check around back for you?" "Oh my gosh, would you?" I asked, relieved. "That would be wonderful, right through here," I said, showing them to the back door. They went out and walked around the lawn for a few minutes and then came back in. "It doesn't look like you have anything amiss," the other cop said, "but we'll drive by later." "Thank you, I really appreciate it," I said, showing them out. I locked the door and let go of Vinny's collar. He ran into the other room to bark at the door again. Part of me wanted to go unlock it, but something told me not to. I finally had enough and put him in the laundry room with his bed and toys, hoping he'd just lie down and go to sleep. But he just kept barking and howling. It was muffled now, though, which made it easier to concentrate on my homework. After what seemed like hours, I clicked the double space option and exhaled proudly, just barely making the page number requirement. That deserves some ice cream for sure. I let Vinny out and scooped myself a bowl and made my way upstairs to get ready for bed. Vinny usually comes with me and sleeps in my bed, but stood at the bottom of the stairs, whining, giving me a little bark. I called him, but he just stood there, panting. I was really unnerved, but left my door open so he could come to bed when he calmed down. I ate my ice cream and read a few chapters in my book, then snuggled in for the night. I don't think I'd even fallen asleep when Vinny just went nuts downstairs. I was out of bed in a flash. He sounded like he was dying or something. On my way downstairs, I heard a loud clatter and a high-pitched scream from Vinny. I found him growling, barking, whining and snarling in the kitchen doorway, fixated on something. I ran to his side to calm him down, and that's when I saw it. The dog door was halfway across the kitchen, lying limp on the tile, and something was trying to come through the hole. The thing was, it was somewhere between one of those gray aliens and a corpse. It had one shoulder and a long, oddly jointed arm claw on the floor, and it struggled to get its other shoulder through. Its skin was somewhere between pale blue and mold green, like dead flesh. The hand that was clawing at the kitchen floor was too long, like it had extra joints in its fingers, which were tipped with ugly little black claws instead of fingernails. Its face was stretched, its jaw hanging lower than it should, in a mewling, groaning, angry moan. It didn't seem to have eyes, just sunken, black, empty sockets. It started to wiggle its other shoulder through the door, and I didn't need to see any more. I pulled Vinny into the garage, not bothering with shoes or pants. I sped to my parents' house, running a few lights along the way. I told my parents what happened, but they didn't believe me, obviously. They did comment on how agitated Vinny was, though. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and I didn't go to school the next morning, opting to play sick and cuddle with Vinny all day. He'd calmed down, and that alone made me feel safe. When my parents went back to the rental house, they found the dog door halfway across the kitchen floor, and half of the backyard torn up. Claw marks were dug into the floor by the door, which they blamed on Vinny, but agreed that the situation was weird. I moved back into my parents' house and insisted they come with me to pack up my stuff. I wouldn't stay past dark either. It's all I can do to stay in school. I'm getting Vinny licensed as a therapy dog so he can come with me everywhere I go. I don't think anything like what happened that night will happen again, but if it does, Vinny has my back.